I never imagined something as simple as house sitting could shake me so deeply, or change the way I looked at people, and even myself. To explain why it left such a mark, I need to start with where I came from. My childhood wasn't just unstable, it was like living on shifting ground, never knowing when it would crack beneath me. My dad was gone before I was old enough to remember him. My mom tried. I know she did, but her fear of being alone consumed her. She chased companionship the way some people chase air, through bars, smoky nights, and men who barely remembered her name in the morning. I grew up watching strangers stumble into our house, men with the stench of whiskey on their breath, anger in their eyes, or defeat carved into their faces. None of them stayed long, but the chaos did. The fights were constant, sometimes just sharp words that ricocheted off the walls, sometimes worse. I can still feel the sound of her screaming in my bones, the way it made me curl under my blanket, pressing my hands over my ears. I hated confrontation. I learned early to smooth things over, to be agreeable, to anticipate moods before they exploded. By the time I reached college, I was a professional at swallowing my own needs to keep everyone else calm. But it came with panic attacks, shaking hands, and a stomach that knotted every time voices rose too high. I had a degree, but that didn't mean stability. I bounced between part-time jobs, patching together rent money while holding my fragile nerves together with duct tape. That's when a friend mentioned house sitting. "It's easy," she said, laughing like it was the best-kept secret in the world. Get paid to sit in someone's house, check the mail, feed their pets, and relax. To me, after years of noise and tension, it sounded like therapy. My first 2 jobs went smoothly, little slices of quiet that felt like stolen treasure. But the third one, mid-2016, that one left a scar I still feel like a bruise beneath my skin. The house was in Riverview, Oregon, a few hours' drive from home. The owner, David Morgan, called me the day before, apologizing for the short notice. He spoke quickly, clipped but polite, like his mind was already in 2 other places. "It's simple," he assured me. "Feed my dog, keep an eye on the place, sign for a couple of packages, 3 nights, that's it." The dog, Bart, turned out to be a massive St. Bernard mix. When I first walked in, he gave me one half-hearted sniff, then collapsed back onto his bed with a sigh big enough to rattle the floor. David scratched Bart's ears with one hand while checking his watch with the other. He seemed kind, but distracted, like a man with deadlines breathing down his neck. The house was modern, tucked behind tall trees that walled it off from the world. Quiet, private, the kind of place that should have felt like refuge. "Bart's friendly but protective," David said, giving the dog's head another pat. "You won't have any problems with him." I smiled, though the nerves in my stomach made me chew the inside of my cheek. 3 nights. I told myself it would be easy. After a quick walkthrough, a few papers signed, and a set of keys exchanged, David was gone. That first day unfolded like a balm. The house was spotless, almost sterile, like no one really lived there. But the backyard patio was a dream. Bart and I stretched out under the shade while a soft breeze cooled the summer air. For the first time in weeks, I felt my chest loosen, like I could breathe without fighting for it. That night I ordered pizza, curled up with Bart on the couch, and put on a Netflix movie. The silence around the house wasn't heavy. It was soothing, like the quiet hum of safety I'd always wanted. For a while it felt perfect, until the doorbell started ringing. At first I thought it might be a late delivery, but it didn't stop at one polite chime. Whoever stood outside pressed it again, then again, and again. The bell screamed through the house in relentless bursts, each shrill note stabbing straight through my nerves. My hands froze around the blanket. My mom's voice echoed in my head. "Never open the door after dark, especially in neighborhoods you don't know." But the bell didn't stop. It grew frantic, violent, like the person's finger was welded to the button. My anxiety surged with every ring, whispering that ignoring it would only make things worse. My heart hammered as I stood, legs trembling, and forced myself toward the door. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with a woman who looked like a storm-given flesh. Her posture screamed hostility. Arms folded tight across her chest, jaw locked, eyes blazing with the kind of fury that makes you take a step back without even realizing it. She looked late 30s, maybe early 40s. Her hair was yanked back into a ponytail so severe it seemed painful, the tension in her face amplifying her anger. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice clipped like a blade. Who?" I asked, shrinking into myself before I could stop it. My throat went dry. "Don't play stupid, David. Where is he?" I froze. For a second my brain stalled, and then I managed to stammer. He's out of town, business trip." "Don't lie to me." Her voice cracked the air like glass shattering. "He's here, isn't he? Tell him to stop hiding behind you." "I swear he's not here." My voice betrayed me, trembling despite everything in me screaming to sound calm. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion hardening into contempt. "Oh, I see how it is. You're the new one. His little girlfriend." The words hit like ice water down my spine. My stomach dropped hollow. No, I'm just house-sitting," I said quickly, shaking my head. She stepped forward, invading my space, her breath sharp with bitterness. "You think I don't know? He does this, sneaks around, brings women into our house." Bart appeared behind me without a sound, his massive frame filling the hallway like a shadow come alive. A low growl rolled from his chest, deep and resonant, like distant thunder. The woman jabbed a finger at me, spitting curses too venomous to repeat. Bart's growl exploded into furious barking, the sound bouncing off the walls, vibrating through my ribs. My chest tightened. My vision blurred at the edges. The panic attack gripped me, fingers tingling, throat clamped shut. "Get him out here," she screamed, voice cracking. I told you he's gone." My voice splintered under the pressure. Something in my words broke her. She lunged, shoving toward the doorway. Bart erupted. He hurled himself at the frame, teeth bared, bark blasting like a shotgun. I reacted on pure instinct, slamming the door shut just as she stumbled back, shrieking. Her fists hammered against the wood. "You can't hide forever, David." I slid down the door, legs giving out, my whole body trembling so violently I thought I might faint. My heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape. Bart stayed at the door, every muscle taut, his eyes locked forward, chest rising and falling in heavy bursts. Minutes stretched into an eternity before I managed to call 911. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped the phone, but the dispatcher's calm, steady voice anchored me, pulling me through the storm until the flashing lights finally cut through the dark outside. When the officers arrived, she was still out there, pacing, shouting, like a caged animal ready to break loose. I stayed pressed against the door as they restrained her. One officer knocked gently, his tone soft. "Ma'am, you're safe now." I cracked the door open just enough to peek. They were leading her toward the patrol car. Her eyes caught mine, locking with a venom that made my stomach churn. "This isn't over," she screamed, fighting against their grip. I flinched, Bart growling low, his body rigid at my side. The officer promised she'd be taken in, though he never said if charges would actually stick. His words were meant to reassure, but instead they felt paper thin, like promises that dissolve in rain. Later, when David finally returned my call, his voice was thick with apologies. "God, I'm so sorry. That must have been terrifying." "Who was she?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. He sighed, a sound heavy with resignation. "Her name's Melissa. We dated on and off. She's jealous, controlling. I thought I'd made it clear it was over." "Does she know where you live?" I pressed, my voice sharp with disbelief. "Apparently," he admitted, letting out a nervous chuckle. "I never thought she'd actually come here. I should have warned you." My chest burned, fury climbing my throat. I wanted to scream at him, tell him how close his negligence came to destroying me. Instead, I whispered, voice cracking, She tried to attack me. Silence stretched. Then, almost pleading, he said, "Please don't quit. Bart needs someone. I'll double your pay." And like clockwork, the old people pleaser in me folded. Bart had stood between me and danger, his body the only barrier between me and her rage. Walking away from him felt wrong. So I stayed. The next 2 nights dragged by, every creak of the house a potential threat. Melissa didn't return, but Bart never left my side. He slept at the foot of the couch, lifting his head at every sound. His steady presence the only thing keeping me tethered. When David finally came back, he avoided my eyes. His apologies were mumbled, shallow, as he handed me an envelope of cash. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for staying, for protecting Bart." I nodded, though a quiet fury pulsed in my chest, sharp and unspoken. Kneeling to hug Bart goodbye, I buried my face in his fur. "You were the only good thing here," I whispered. He licked my cheek, and tears stung my eyes. I left that morning knowing it would be my last house-sitting job. The peace I'd been searching for had been shattered by someone else's chaos. I never saw Bart again, but sometimes, when the darkness presses in and panic claws at my chest, I imagine him there, his massive body planted in front of me, shielding me from the storm. And then I wonder, what if, next time, there isn't a Bart to protect me? I grew up in a small town in southern Illinois, the kind of place people usually describe as safe, quiet, even idyllic. To me, though, it was never any of those things. My earliest years were painted in shades of instability, voices raised in sharp arguments that bled through paper-thin apartment walls, nights spent bracing for the next slammed door, the next explosion. There was always this tension, like holding your breath and waiting for something you couldn't name but knew was coming. My mom, Denise, was barely more than a kid herself when she had me, 19 and already exhausted by life. My dad was gone before I could hold more than a blur of memories of him. He wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but when I think of him, I remember calmness, rational words, hands that didn't shake with anger or reek of alcohol. He was flawed, sure, but he wasn't chaos. My mom, on the other hand, was restless, always looking for someone to fix her, to make her feel whole. Men came and went like seasons in our house. Some were forgettable, others mean drunks, a few just broken in quiet ways. Then there was Trevor. From the start, something about him put me on edge. He had these washed-out blue eyes, sharp and empty, like he was always doing math in his head, calculating people instead of caring about them. He wasn't loud or explosive at first. Quite the opposite. He was charming in a practiced way, joking with neighbors, tightening loose doorknobs, tossing us kids a little kindness like spare change. Once he even took me and my little sister Emily out for ice cream, smiling like some sitcom stepdad. But that smile never reached his eyes. And Mom, I think she saw it too. I think she knew the mask would slip eventually. But loneliness to her was worse than danger. Worse than Trevor. I was 11 when it all curdled into something I couldn't ignore. It was late October, one of those nights when the air cut your lungs and your shoes crunched leaves to dust. Emily was 7, buzzing with excitement, spinning in her princess costume until the hem frayed. For weeks she'd been chirping about candy, about which houses gave out the good stuff. Trick-or-treating with her was the one time I felt like her protector, instead of just another kid in the storm. Those few hours under the streetlights, laughing at goofy decorations, comparing candy bars, it was our brief escape from the suffocating tension of home. That year we did well. Our bags bulged with candy, and Emily was dragging her feet by the time we climbed the cracked concrete steps back to the house. That's when I noticed it. The porch light was out. Mom never left it off, not even when she was working late. My chest tightened. I pushed the door open. Trevor stood there in the living room. His face was flushed, jaw locked so hard I thought it might shatter. He didn't speak to Emily, didn't smile, just looked at her in this way that made her shrink back instantly. Without a word, she scurried toward her room. I shoved my candy bag into her hands, whispering, "It's okay, just go." When I turned, Trevor's eyes were already on me. He motioned with 2 fingers, curt, sharp. "Come on." My stomach nodded. "Why? We're not even late." He didn't answer, just turned and walked toward the garage, his boots heavy against the linoleum. The way his shoulders moved, tense, deliberate, made my throat go dry. I followed, each step reluctant, my pulse drumming in my ears. In the garage, the smell of oil and damp concrete pressed close. Trevor grabbed something from a shelf and shoved it into my chest, a pair of stiff work gloves, then a folded black trash bag. I stared at them, my fingers numb around the plastic. "What's this for?" My voice cracked, thin. Trevor didn't look at me, didn't blink, just stood there, the silence stretching like a noose. He grabbed the shovel leaning against the wall like it had been waiting for him, then slid a small hatchet into his belt without a word. The silence was worse than shouting. It was heavy, deliberate, and it wrapped around me like a threat. We crossed the backyard, past the rusted swing set no one touched anymore, its chains rattling faintly in the breeze. The grass gave way to dirt, then to the tangle of trees that bordered our property. The deeper we pushed into the woods, the colder it seemed to get. Shadows swallowed the path until the only light came from a thin slice of moon breaking through the branches. My chest ached with every heartbeat. Finally, in a small clearing, Trevor stopped. He turned abruptly and slammed the shovel into my chest hard enough to make me stumble. His voice was flat, stripped of emotion. "Dig." I blinked at him. "Dig what?" "Just dig." The way he said it, sharp like a snapped bone, cut deeper than if he'd screamed. My throat tightened. I forced the shovel into the dirt, scooping clumps of earth. The metal felt too heavy, too big for my 11-year-old arms. My hands shook, my palms burning from the rough handle. I tried to steady my breathing, but it kept breaking in shallow gasps. After a few minutes, Trevor crouched down beside me. The reek of whiskey hit me first, sour and suffocating. His voice slid into my ear. "You want to know why you're digging?" "Yes," I whispered. He leaned closer, the moon catching in his pale eyes, making him look wrong, almost inhuman. His lips curled in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Because if things don't go my way," he murmured, "this is where you're going to end up." The shovel slipped from my hands, clattering against the roots. My whole body froze. "What? You heard me?" His tone was calm, steady, too calm. "Your dad's got that custody hearing in 2 weeks. If he wins, you and your sister go live with him. And I lose everything. That's not happening, you understand me?" I swallowed hard, my throat raw. "But I can't. I don't control that." His eyes narrowed, and he tapped the hatchet against his palm, slow and deliberate. "You better figure out how, because if I lose, you lose. Simple as that." I wanted to scream, to bolt into the trees, but my legs wouldn't move. Fear had me nailed to the spot. It wasn't new. I'd been swallowing fear for years, but never like this. This one pressed down on me, heavy, permanent. When he finally told me to cover the hole back up, I didn't ask why. I already knew. I filled the dirt back in with shaking hands, the sound of soil hitting soil louder than anything else in the clearing. He didn't explain. Didn't need to. We walked back to the house in silence. Only the crunch of dead leaves under our feet reminded me the world outside still existed, that this wasn't just some nightmare. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Emily was asleep in the next room, her candy spread across the carpet like a dragon's hoard, her little breaths steady and innocent. I kept replaying the sound of the shovel, the way Trevor's eyes had glinted, how close I'd come to vanishing forever in that patch of woods. 2 weeks later, the custody hearing came. My dad won. The judge barely blinked after seeing Trevor's record. Bar fights, DUIs, domestic calls stacked like evidence of who he really was. Mom stared at the floor the whole time, silent, while Trevor seethed beside her, his jaw twitching with each word the judge spoke. When it ended, Dad drove me and Emily to his new apartment across town. We never saw Trevor again. Mom refused to leave him, and over time, her phone calls slowed until they stopped completely. Sometimes, when I think back to that night, I wonder if Trevor truly would have gone through with it, if that hole was meant to be my grave, or if he just wanted to carve fear so deep into me I'd never speak up. But it doesn't matter. The damage was done. That night taught me a truth I'll never unlearn. Monsters don't hide under your bed. They sit at your kitchen table, drink from your glasses, and wait for the dark. And when I was 11 years old, I dug my own grave because the man who should have protected me was the same man who wanted to bury me in it. I never imagined I'd end up in the kind of relationship people lower their voices to talk about, the kind you see on late-night true crime specials, the kind wrapped in warnings and red flags you always assume you'd spot from a mile away. If someone had asked me even 3 years ago, I would have said I was too sharp, too independent, too stubborn to ever get caught in something like that. But it doesn't happen like a lightning strike. It seeps in, one drop at a time, until you're soaked without realizing it. At first, it's just a drip you ignore. Then another. You convince yourself it's nothing. And then one day the ceiling collapses on you. My name is Elena Vargas. This happened in New Haven, Connecticut, a small city I once thought of as a fresh start after dragging myself out of a humiliating college breakup. I was working remotely for a mid-sized publishing company, editing manuscripts and writing marketing blurbs, which meant most of my days bled into each other. My apartment was a third-floor walk-up in an old brick building with radiators that clanked at night and windows that let in too much winter wind. Not glamorous, but it was mine. I kept telling myself I was rebuilding piece by piece, and for a while I believed it. That's when Adrian Hall appeared. He wasn't the kind of man who swept into a room and owned it. No flashy grin, no overwhelming charm. He leaned in when you spoke, eyes fixed as if nothing else in the world mattered. We met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner, and at first it was just polite conversation. He asked what I did for work, and when I said publishing, he didn't zone out or glance at his phone like most guys did. He asked follow-up questions. He actually listened. After years of men pretending to care, that felt rare. Over the next few weeks, I started seeing him more often. At group hangouts, grabbing coffee with mutual friends, then sliding into my texts. At first, it was light. How's your day? Then it turned into, what are you doing right now? And eventually, why didn't you text me back? I brushed it off as flattering. Who doesn't want to feel wanted? When we officially began dating, it felt like slipping into a routine I hadn't realized I'd been craving. He cooked for me, brought flowers to my apartment, just because. Remembered small details I barely remembered telling him. My mom, who'd been nagging me for years to find someone stable, adored the sound of him over the phone. My friends thought he was sweet, and for the first time in a long time I thought maybe I'd finally gotten something right. But Adrian had a way of weaving himself into my life so quietly that I didn't notice how much of it he was taking over. The first crack appeared about 3 months in. One evening he dropped by unannounced while I was on FaceTime with my younger brother Diego, who lived in Florida. Adrian sat beside me on the couch, silent at first, but the longer I laughed and chatted with Diego, the more I felt his energy shift. His fingers tapped against his knee, his jaw tightened. When I hung up, he said softly, "You talk to him a lot." I smiled, not getting it. "Yeah, he's my brother." "That's good," he said, but his expression didn't match the words. His eyes looked flat, calculating. "It's just, you seemed more excited talking to him than you ever do with me." I laughed awkwardly, brushed it off as a weird comment, but it stuck with me. It was the first time I noticed how his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The second crack came soon after, when my friend Lana got promoted and planned a girls' night to celebrate at a rooftop bar. When I told Adrian, he frowned. "I don't like that idea," he said. "Why not?" I asked, half laughing. "Those places are crawling with creeps. You know how men are when they're drunk. I'd rather you didn't go." I rolled my eyes. "Adrian, it's just my friends. You're overthinking it." He didn't argue further. He just gave a small nod and said, "If you really want to go, go. Just don't be surprised if I don't answer when you call later." That night, when I texted him, he ignored me. My calls went straight to voicemail. I lay awake, heart pounding, convinced something awful had happened to him. Finally, at 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. "Glad you had fun without me." And that became a pattern, restrictions dressed up as concern. "Don't wear that dress, it's too revealing." "Don't drink too much, you know how you get." "Don't post that photo, it's not a good look for you." Each rule sounded small on its own, but they piled up, drip after drip, and before I realized it, I was drenched. "People don't need to see you like that." That's how he always phrased it. Framed as protection, never control. But each time he said it, I felt myself shrinking a little smaller, like he was trimming away pieces of me until only what he wanted was left. The worst part wasn't Adrian's anger, though when it came it was sharp and sudden, like a blade. No, what terrified me most was the silence. The way he'd stare, unblinking, his eyes heavy and dissecting like I was a specimen pinned beneath glass. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night and find him sitting up in bed watching me. "Why are you awake?" I'd whisper, my throat tight. "Just making sure you're still here," he'd murmur before lying back down as if it were nothing. At first I told myself it was strange, but oddly romantic, like something out of a gothic novel. But over time, the charm soured. It stopped feeling like devotion and started feeling like surveillance. The turning point came one chilly afternoon in late October. I'd been editing a manuscript all morning when a knock sounded at my apartment door. It was Mrs. Callahan, my elderly neighbor from across the hall, a retired teacher with a soft voice and a kindness that reminded me of my grandmother. She smiled warmly, holding out a plate of cookies. "I haven't seen you in a while, Elena," she said. "You okay?" I opened my mouth to answer, but Adrian materialized behind me, his hand clamped firmly onto my shoulder. "She's fine," he said smoothly, smiling the way a politician smiles. "We've just been busy." Mrs. Callahan's smile wavered. Her eyes flicked to me, searching for confirmation. Adrian's grip tightened, almost imperceptibly, and all I could do was nod. When I closed the door, I exhaled shakily. "You didn't need to do that," I told him. "Do what?" His head tilted, feigning confusion. "Answer for me." He smiled faintly. "I'm just looking out for you." But that night, I couldn't shake Mrs. Callahan's expression, the concern in her eyes, the pity. It was like she knew something I hadn't let myself admit yet. The real horror wasn't just his control or the way he isolated me. It was how much of myself I'd let slip away before I noticed. I stopped calling Diego as often. I canceled plans with friends. My hobbies gathered dust in the corners of my apartment. One morning I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked small, worn out, hollow. The breaking point came in November. I was scheduled to give a short talk at a local library about editing and publishing, a minor event, nothing I'd even thought to share in detail. But when I stepped up to the podium, there he was, Adrian, sitting in the back row. His eyes locked on me, unwavering the entire time. Afterward, he cornered me outside. "Why didn't you want me here?" he demanded, his voice low and tight. "It wasn't about you," I snapped, my nerves frayed. "It was my work." He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel his breath. "Everything about you is about me, Elena. Don't you get that?" Something inside me cracked, For the first time in months, I pushed back, literally. I shoved him hard and walked away trembling. That night I didn't sleep. My phone buzzed until dawn, message after message, apologies, please, threats. You don't understand how much I need you. If you leave me, I don't know what I'll do. I can't live without you, Elena. By morning, my decision was made. I packed a bag with shaking hands, called Diego, and told him everything. My voice broke as I admitted how scared I was. He didn't hesitate. He booked me a flight and said, "Come home now." Leaving wasn't dramatic. There were no screaming confrontations, no police lights flashing outside. I slipped out in the early morning, the hallways quiet, my bag digging into my shoulder. My heart felt heavier than the suitcase. I didn't leave a note. Adrian called me 73 times that day. 73. By the time my plane landed, I'd blocked his number. Still, for weeks afterward, every knock at the door made me flinch. Every unknown number sent a cold wave through my stomach. Therapy helped slowly. Rebuilding trust in myself helped more. But looking back, the scariest part isn't what Adrian did. It's how easily I let myself believe his version of love was normal. That's what toxic relationships do. They don't just trap you inside someone else's nightmare. They convince you it's your home. And even now, some nights I still wake up suddenly, heart racing, certain someone is sitting in the dark, watching me breathe. I always thought of myself as the kind of person who slipped through life unnoticed. Not invisible exactly, just forgettable. I wasn't the girl people remembered after a party, or the one boys whispered about. If I stood out at all, it was usually for the wrong reasons. Growing up in a small Arizona town called Winslow taught me that kids can be vicious when they smell weakness. By the time I was 12, I already carried around nicknames that clung to me like burrs. Horseface, lopsided, misfrown. Most of them were aimed at my lips, fuller than most girls, with one side tilting downward, giving me a permanent half scowl. I laughed it off in public, but every trip to the mirror was just another silent verdict that maybe they were right. My mom, a nurse who raised me almost entirely on her own, did her best to soften the blows. After one particularly brutal day at school, she sat me down, brushing my hair back as if that alone could shield me. "Marina, your features are unique. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise," she'd say, her voice steady, though her eyes always carried worry. But when you're a teenager desperate to disappear into sameness, unique feels like just another synonym for ugly. By the time I left for Northern Arizona University at 19, I'd mastered the art of walls. I didn't go to parties, didn't join clubs, didn't risk rejection. I poured myself into psychology, partly because I wanted to understand people, but mostly because I was still trying to understand myself, why the sting of exclusion always seemed to follow me like a shadow that never loosened its grip. That's when he entered my life. Adrian Blake. It was the first week of classes, a late summer morning still warm enough to make the air shimmer. I'd chosen a seat near the back of the lecture hall, hoping to vanish into the sea of strangers. My pen scratched across the page, dutiful, mechanical, when a voice leaned in close and broke my rhythm. "You have really pretty eyes." I froze, the pen dangling above paper like it no longer knew what to do. Slowly I turned. He was smiling, tall, lean, with messy brown hair that looked like he'd just rolled out of bed. His green eyes caught the light in a way that felt too direct, too observant, like he saw something no one else ever had. "Sorry?" I whispered, cheeks heating as I dropped my gaze back to the notebook. Compliments had always made me uneasy, especially the kind that felt undeserved. He didn't retreat. He leaned in just enough to be heard. "I mean it. They're the kind of eyes that make people listen." I almost laughed out loud at the absurdity. "Me? The same eyes kids mocked for years? I wanted to brush him off, to bury myself in indifference. Instead, I just gave a small awkward nod and kept writing. But he kept showing up. Every class, every lecture, sliding into the seat beside me as though it belonged to him. Some mornings he handed me a coffee without asking. Other times, he offered me his notes when mine trailed off. And every single day he told me I was pretty. At first it grated on me. It felt like he was prying open doors I had nailed shut long ago. But his persistence was disarming. Bit by bit, the armor I had wrapped around myself began to crack. My mom's voice had always sounded hollow when she told me to love myself. But when Adrian said my eyes were striking, or my hair caught the light, or my lips were soft, I caught myself wanting, aching, to believe him. And I started to change. Small things at first. A softer sweater here, jeans that actually fit instead of swallowing me whole. I dabbled with makeup, tracing over my lips, trying to tilt the balance, to hide the asymmetry. I even bought hazel contact lenses, subtle enough to draw out the green flecks he claimed to love. One night I lingered in front of the mirror, staring at the girl staring back. She didn't quite look like me, and for once that felt like a blessing. When Adrian noticed, his smile stretched wide, victorious. "See? I told you. You're beautiful." God, I wanted that to be true. I wanted it so badly that it hurt. And then in March, 6 months after that first morning, it happened. I opened my locker in the psychology building and froze. Tucked between my textbooks was a folded piece of paper. My name scribbled in Adrian's neat handwriting. "Be mine, Marina." Adrian. My heart jumped, a fluttering thing in my chest. For a fleeting second, I smiled, daring to hope. But the old voice inside me returned, sharp and cruel. Ugly girlfriend, joke, laughing stock. The words sank like stones. That evening, he found me outside the library, leaning casually against the brick wall as if he owned the world. "So, what's your answer?" His green eyes searched mine, patient yet intense. I stared at the pavement, fingers curled around my backpack strap. "Adrian, I can't. I don't want to be the girl your friends whisper about. I don't want to be ugly." He reached for my hand, his grip firm but gentle. "You're not ugly, Marina," he said softly, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "You're the only girl I see. I don't care what anyone else thinks." I didn't respond. I just let him pull me into a hug, my chest aching with an impossible mix of fear and longing. By April, I'd given in. I said yes. Dating Adrian felt like stepping into sunlight after years spent in shadows. He brought flowers, left little notes in my backpack, kissed me in front of people as if he were proud. At first, I told myself I didn't care when his friends snickered behind my back. Blake's charity case. Ugly duckling. Lips McGee. He had chosen me, hadn't he? That should have been enough. But one moment shattered everything. It was the last day of class before summer break. I'd texted Adrian that morning saying I was sick and wouldn't be coming. When he showed up at my apartment with orange juice, painkillers, and a small container of soup, I felt a flicker of hope. He kissed my forehead gently, whispering, "Rest, Marina. I'll be here." I wanted to believe him. Later, restless, I decided to attend class anyway. I slipped into the building quietly, trying to be invisible, but laughter erupted from inside as soon as I entered the hallway. Through the half-open door, I heard one of his friends call out, "Where's your ugly girl today?" Then Adrian's voice, light and joking, carrying far too easily. "She's sick. At least I don't have to kiss those giant lips today." The room exploded with laughter. My chest tightened so violently that I felt like I couldn't breathe. Without looking at anyone, I turned and walked away, swallowing my tears, my stomach twisting. That night, over a cheap pizza at a diner, he broke up with me as casually as if checking a box on a homework assignment. "It was fun, Marina," he said, picking at the crust. "But you're too much work. Don't take it personally." too much work. The words burrowed under my skin, carving themselves into my bones. I shut myself in my room for days, replaying every smile, every compliment, every tender word he'd ever said. What I thought had been love was nothing but a cruel, orchestrated performance. But the universe has its ways. A week later, news spread across campus. Adrian Blake was dead. He'd been hiking near Oak Creek Canyon with 2 friends. Somehow he slipped. They found his body at the bottom of a cliff, skull fractured, legs bent at grotesque angles. People mourned, candles were lit, flowers piled up like a tiny memorial. Me? I felt a smile curl across my lips. His death reminded me of other losses I'd survived, ones that had shaped the person I'd become. When I was 9, my Chihuahua Pico died suddenly. The night before, my cousin, who loved him dearly, had gone out of town. The vet had said it was poisoning. At 17, my best friend Leah promised she'd keep in touch when she moved away, but their car spun out on the freeway. She died instantly. Both times, the people I loved most had tried to leave me, and both times fate had intervened. Adrian? I didn't touch him. I never laid a hand on him, but deep down, I understood the truth. The universe listens when I hurt. It answers in the language it knows best. Loss. When I picture Adrian's body at the bottom of that canyon, I feel a strange satisfaction. Not because I wanted him dead, but because finally the scales had tipped. He had dangled love in front of me, made me believe in something tender, then laughed as he ripped it away. What did he expect? That I would forgive? Forget? Keep living with his voice inside my head, mocking me, tearing me down, making me feel small? The world doesn't work that way. Not for me. Not anymore. That night I looked in the mirror. My lips trembled as I smiled, ugly or not, and I realized something vital. No one leaves me. Not without paying. And if the universe ever forgets to step in again, I won't hesitate to remind it. I never realized that moving out on my own could feel like freedom and punishment rolled into one. It was the fall of 2016 when I stuffed my life into a few cardboard boxes and left behind the quiet, wooded hills of Virginia. I told myself I wanted change, that I wanted to chase something bigger than the tiny town I grew up in. But if I'm being honest, I think I just wanted distance. From my family, from the memories that still gnawed at me, from all the things I couldn't fix no matter how hard I tried. I landed in a small Pennsylvania city, big enough to disappear in, small enough that it didn't chew you up and spit you out. I found a 1-bedroom apartment in this old brick building that smelled permanently of dust and overcooked cabbage drifting from the neighbors' kitchens. The floors whined whenever I crossed them, and the heater coughed to life at night like it was on its last breath. But it was mine. For the first time, the silence around me belonged only to me. I worked part-time at a bookstore while finishing classes at the community college. The job wasn't glamorous. Restocking shelves, scanning barcodes, nodding politely at customers who asked for books they couldn't remember the title of. But it covered rent, and most mornings I grabbed cheap coffee from the cafe down the street, tucked my hair behind my ears, and tried to convince myself I wasn't just another 20-something drifting without a map. That's where I met him. Ethan Hale. The first time he walked in, I noticed him instantly. Not because he was loud, but because he didn't fit. He wasn't like the other college guys who stumbled in for used textbooks or comic books. There was a sharpness to him, like he carried the air of someplace else. Broad shoulders, a strong jawline, dark hair cut neat and precise. His eyes were so dark, they seemed almost black. And they didn't just look at you, they lingered. He wore a beat-up leather jacket, the kind that told stories without saying a word. When he smiled at me, something in the room shifted. "Hey," he said casually, sliding a novel across the counter. His voice was calm, steady. "Do you actually recommend this?" Or is it just one of those books people buy to sound smart? I let out a quick laugh. Honestly, it's overrated. The author kind of likes listening to himself talk. His grin widened, and just like that, I was caught. We started talking more. At first it was light, him asking about books, me finding excuses to stretch out the conversation. Then one evening he leaned on the counter and asked, "You want to grab coffee after your shift?" I said yes before I even thought about it. Things with Ethan moved quickly, like water rushing downhill. Within weeks, he was showing up at my apartment with takeout, hanging around until the early hours. By Christmas, he was practically living there. He told me I made him feel grounded, that being with me reminded him of home, though he never actually said where home was. His past was always a blurred outline. He'd say his childhood was complicated, that he moved around too much, that family wasn't really part of his life anymore. I didn't push him. I understood the urge to bury what hurts, but small things began to surface. He didn't like when I went out without telling him. He bristled around my male friends, said they looked at me the wrong way. If I didn't answer his text right away, my phone would buzz with call after call until I picked up. Once I left my phone in the bathroom while showering, and when I came out, he was standing there accusing me of ignoring him. At first, his intensity felt flattering, like he cared too much. Isn't that what love is? Caring, maybe even obsessively. But then came the temper. The first time I saw it, we were cooking dinner together. I knocked a glass off the counter. It shattered across the tile. He froze, then slammed his fist into the wall so hard the picture frame rattled. "God damn it," he barked, eyes flashing. "You need to be more careful." My stomach dropped. I stood there, pulse hammering in my throat, staring at the way his face twisted into something sharp and unfamiliar. And then, just as fast, he softened. He kissed my forehead, his voice suddenly gentle. "I'm sorry, baby. I didn't mean to scare you. I get stressed sometimes." I forgave him. Of course I did. That became the rhythm of us. He'd explode, then apologize. He'd frighten me, then pull me back in with tenderness. And every single time I told myself the same thing. It was just a bad day, just stress, just me overthinking. But the truth was darker than I wanted to admit, something unraveling slowly beneath the surface of us. One night in February, I woke to find Ethan sitting on the edge of the bed. He wasn't moving, just staring at me, his eyes wide and unblinking, like he was memorizing every detail of my face. My voice cracked as I whispered, "What's wrong?" Groggy, half asleep, I expected him to laugh it off. He didn't, not at first. Then he leaned close, so close I felt his breath against my ear and whispered, "You're not going to leave me. Ever. Right?" I swallowed, my throat tight. "Of course not." His lips curved into a smile. He kissed me, then laid back down as if nothing had happened. But my body stayed rigid beneath the blankets. I couldn't shake the tone in his voice. It wasn't a question, it was a warning. By spring, the cracks were no longer cracks. They were gaping splits I couldn't ignore. Ethan started showing up at the bookstore unannounced, lingering in the aisles under the excuse of just checking in. When I wasn't looking, he'd thumb through my phone. If I so much as mentioned another man's name, his jaw would tighten and his body would stiffen like a drawn bow. Claire, my closest friend from class, noticed. One afternoon in the library, she studied me longer than the textbook in front of her. "You're quieter lately," she said. "Are you okay? Is it Ethan?" I hesitated. Then I shook my head, forcing a smile. "No, it's fine. He's just intense." "Intense how?" she pressed, her brow furrowed. I shrugged, pretending it didn't matter. But the truth burned inside me. I didn't know how to explain that Ethan made me feel like the most important person alive one moment, and like his prisoner the next. The breaking point came in June. We were arguing in my apartment because I'd gone out with Claire after class instead of coming straight home. His jaw clenched, his fists balled at his sides. "You think she cares about you more than I do?" His voice was sharp, venomous. She doesn't know you like I do. No one does. No one ever will. Ethan, you're scaring me, I whispered, backing into the kitchen. He followed, eyes blazing. Good. Maybe you should be scared. Maybe then you'll stop running off with other people and remember who you belong to. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone. I'm calling someone. His face changed instantly. He stepped back, forced a smile, muttered, I didn't mean that. God, I just don't want to lose you. Please don't make me the bad guy. But in that moment, something clicked cold inside me. He wasn't afraid of being the bad guy. He was afraid of being caught. After that, I tried to pull away. I told him I needed space, that I wanted to focus on school. He didn't take it well. At first, my phone blew up with hundreds of texts in one night, voicemails begging me to answer. Then came the anger, threats that he'd show up at my job, warnings that I couldn't just erase him like he was nothing. One night, I came home late and saw him sitting on the stairwell outside my building, just sitting in the dark, waiting. Ethan, I whispered, my whole body freezing. What are you doing here? He stood, shadows cutting across his face. Making sure you got home safe. I worry about you. I forced a weak laugh. You can't just wait outside like this. It's creepy. His smile cracked. Creepy? After everything I've done for you, that's what I am now? I didn't answer. I couldn't. The last time I saw him was in July. I finally cut him off completely, blocked his number, changed my locks, begged Claire to stay with me for a while. For a brief stretch, it worked. The silence felt strange, almost heavy, but it was relief all the same. Then one night I woke to a sound at the window, a faint tapping. My stomach dropped. I froze, listening. The tapping stretched into a scrape, like fingertips dragging across the glass. Claire stirred beside me. What's that? She mumbled. I forced myself to look. Ethan was standing on the fire escape, his face pressed against the glass, his dark eyes locked on mine. I screamed. Claire screamed. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. They told me there wasn't much they could do. He hadn't broken in, hadn't laid a hand on me. They suggested a restraining order but warned it might only provoke him. That was when I realized how powerless I really was. It's been years since then. I moved to a different city, changed my number, cut ties with anyone who might connect me back to him. Piece by piece, I built a new life. But at night, when the house is quiet, I still hear that tapping on the glass. I still see his black eyes staring in at me. And in crowded streets, sometimes I swear I feel him watching. Because people like Ethan don't just disappear, they linger, like shadows, like scars. And no matter how far you run, you never truly escape. I never thought I'd put this into words, but holding it inside for so long has poisoned me in ways I can't fully explain. Maybe if I finally lay it out, the weight will ease a little. My name is Daniel Rains. Back in 2016, I was 24, fresh out of college, newly hired as a junior accountant, and living alone in a small one-bedroom apartment near downtown Columbus, Ohio. My life was steady, ordinary, maybe even painfully predictable. Safe, yes, but lonely. I'd always been the quiet one, the guy who melted into the back of the classroom, scribbled notes, never raised his hand, never stood out. I wasn't unattractive, but I wasn't the kind of man people's eyes lingered on either. All through high school and college, I watched the confident, charming guys, ones with easy smiles, money, and social grace, drift seamlessly into relationships while I stayed invisible, orbiting in the background. So when graduation ended and real adulthood began, I made a silent promise to myself. This is the year I'll change. This is the year I'll find someone. That determination pushed me to download a handful of dating apps. I uploaded pictures where I tried to look relaxed and confident, though in truth the tightness in my shoulders gave me away. Most of the time, my messages floated into the void. Never read, never answered. Until one night I got a match. Her name was Elena Morris. Her profile picture made me pause. She didn't look like someone you stumbled across online. She looked like someone out of a dream, or a magazine spread. Long black hair that shimmered under soft lighting. Olive-toned skin. Green eyes so sharp they seemed to pierce straight through me. Her bio was short, but it hooked me. Book lover. Night owl. Looking for someone genuine. When the first message came from her, I thought it was some kind of scam. Elena. Hey, I like your smile. You seem sweet. Want to chat? I stared at those words for almost 10 minutes, my mind spinning, palms clammy against my phone. Then I typed back. Me. Me? Sure. Honestly, didn't think someone like you would swipe right on someone like me. She sent a quick reply, followed by a string of haha, like laughter caught mid-breath. That tiny reaction felt electric, and then the conversation just flowed. For the first time, I wasn't forcing small talk. She asked about my childhood, about the movies I rewatched when I couldn't sleep, about what kept me up at night. She told me she used to be awkward in high school, an outcast, a bookworm with braces, and how she knew what it felt like to be overlooked. We talked every single night for a week, and for the first time in my life I felt something I'd never felt before. Chosen. When Elena suggested meeting in person, I almost dropped the phone. Wait, you're serious? I asked, my voice cracking with disbelief. Of course I'm serious, she teased, her voice smooth, playful, almost daring. What's the point of talking forever if we never meet? Come on, Daniel. Take me somewhere nice. We agreed on a cafe near the Ohio State campus. I remember standing outside that evening, my palms slick with sweat, scanning the street and half expecting no one to show. Or worse, that I'd been catfished. But then the door opened, and she walked in. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. She was even more breathtaking in person, tall, poised, moving with a grace that seemed rehearsed yet effortless. And then of all the people in that room, her eyes locked on me. She smiled like she'd been waiting for this moment. Daniel? She asked softly. I nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah. Hi. She sat across from me, and suddenly the world shrank down to just the two of us. Hours passed in what felt like minutes. She laughed at my clumsy jokes, leaned in when I faltered, brushed my hand when I got too nervous. Every second with her carried this unreal glow, like I'd stumbled into someone else's life. When the cafe staff started stacking chairs and sweeping floors, I offered to walk her home. She leaned close, her voice low enough to stir the air against my ear. Or, she whispered, we could go to your place instead. My heart hammered. I live alone, I stammered. Her lips curved into a slow, mischievous smile. Perfect. The moment we stepped into my apartment, she kissed me. Hard. Everything that followed blurred into something feverish, too intense, too consuming, too much for me to process. For her, it felt natural, practiced, like she'd done this countless times before. For me, it was my first. But what lingers most in my memory isn't the intimacy. It's something else entirely. It was the silence that unsettled me most. Afterward, she slipped her clothes back on with practiced precision, not a word spoken, not even a glance in my direction. No soft laughter, no lingering brush of her hand, no warmth left behind. Just the sound of fabric sliding over skin, then her standing by the door with a strange, unreadable smile. See you soon, she said quietly. Then she was gone. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, my chest tightening with confusion. Something about her detachment gnawed at me, but I swallowed it down. I told myself I was lucky, that maybe this was how confident, experienced people behaved, that it was me who didn't know the rules. The following days crawled by, each one more agonizing than the last. Elena barely answered my texts, sometimes only sending back an emoji or a one-word reply. My stomach twisted with insecurity. By the third day, I broke. Me. Did you enjoy the other night? Or was it just me? Her reply came back within seconds, faster than I expected. Elena. Of course I did. You were amazing. Don't doubt that. Relief surged through me. My face burned with an almost childlike happiness. But then, another message blinked on my screen. Elena. Actually, I've been planning a little surprise. You're free tomorrow, right? I want to take you on a road trip. A road trip. With her. My ego soared. My doubts dissolved. Without thinking, I typed back, yes. The next evening, she pulled up outside my apartment. She looked impossibly put together. Tight jeans hugging her frame, a black leather jacket, a small purse slung over her shoulder. I glanced around for luggage, a bag, anything. There was nothing. You travel light, I joked nervously. Her lips curved into a smirk. I like to keep things spontaneous. We drove west, the city lights dissolving behind us until only dark wooded highways stretched ahead. The sun bled orange and red as it dipped beneath the horizon. For a while it felt like a dream. She laughed at my dumb comments, her hand brushing mine on the console. My chest swelled with something that felt almost like belonging. Then her touch shifted. Her hand lingered, slid slowly up my thigh, deliberate, hungry. My pulse thundered in my ears. Without thinking, I pulled onto a deserted stretch of road, the car headlights cutting pale beams through the trees. We kissed, frantic, breathless. I was consumed, lost, until something sharp tore through the haze, a stabbing pain, hot, shocking, right in my chest. I froze, pulled back, eyes dropping down. Elena was holding a knife. The blade glistened red. What the Elena? I gasped, clutching the wound. Her face twisted into something unrecognizable, caught between ecstasy and madness. Shh, she whispered, eyes gleaming. Don't ruin it. This is the best part. My throat tightened. What the hell are you doing? She giggled, a high, broken, chilling sound. I've done this before. It's thrilling. You'll see. Your blood will cover me while we make love, and then I'll rest on your corpse. Terror surged through me like lightning. I shoved at her, adrenaline ripping through my body. She was stronger than she looked. The knife slashed across my arm, fire shooting through the cut. Stop! Are you insane? I screamed. Her eyes were wild, inhuman, shining with something predatory. Don't fight it, Daniel, just let go. She lunged again, the blade grazing the skin of my neck. Panic overtook me. With every ounce of strength I had, I gripped her wrist, twisting, trying to wrench the weapon away. In the chaos, the knife slipped. She gasped, a strangled sound, as the blade sank into her throat. Time slowed to nothing. Her eyes widened, the madness faltering into raw shock. Blood poured in thick streams down her chest. She choked, gurgling, her body trembling violently. Without thinking, without even realizing what I was doing, I yanked the knife free and, in blind terror, drove it into her again and again. I needed to be sure she wouldn't get back up. When the frenzy drained out of me, reality crashed in. She was dead. Elena, the woman I thought was my dream, my chance at love, lay slumped in the passenger seat, her skin already cooling, her eyes still open. My stomach lurched, my vision tunneled. Prison, headlines, my life over. I panicked. I drove. I drove until the roads grew narrow, until I reached a cliff overlooking a black river. With trembling hands, I dragged her body into the driver's seat, set the car in neutral, and pushed. The vehicle rolled forward slowly, then tipped, vanishing over the edge. The crash below was muffled, swallowed by the rushing water. The river closed over it, erasing her. I stood there in the dark, chest bleeding, arm burning, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. My car, my possessions, my first lover, all gone in a single night. Somehow, I made it back home. I stitched my wounds with trembling hands, terrified of hospitals, of questions I couldn't answer. For weeks I waited for sirens, for detectives, for her name to appear on the news. But it never came. No missing posters, no investigation. It was like she had never existed. But I know she did. I see her face every time I close my eyes. I hear her laugh in the silence. I feel that knife pierce me again whenever I think about letting anyone close. That was 6 years ago. I haven't dated since. I don't go out. I don't trust anyone. Because I've learned the truth. Beauty can hide monsters. And sometimes the person you dream of loving isn't there to save you. They're there to destroy you. I never imagined I'd let someone tear me apart piece by piece, but that's exactly what happened. It's embarrassing to admit now, though back then, I couldn't see it clearly. I was naive, hungry for love, and far too willing to hand my trust to people who hadn't earned a scrap of it. To explain how I ended up in the mess I did, I have to go back to the version of me that existed before everything unraveled. I grew up in a one-bedroom apartment wedged above a liquor store in Columbus, Ohio. My mom raised me alone. She was kind, but there was a heaviness about her, like loneliness had set up camp inside her and refused to leave. My dad left before I was old enough to have a memory of his face. Mom worked long shifts as a nursing assistant. By the time she got home, she was exhausted, smelling faintly of antiseptic and sweat. Most nights she'd collapse onto the couch with a cheap glass of Merlot and a man beside her. There were always men. Some stuck around for weeks, others for a few months. They carried the same traits: impatience in their eyes, stale beer on their breath, and irritation when they realized I came as part of the package. I learned early that survival meant staying invisible. When voices rose, I slipped into my room, closed the door, and prayed the shouting didn't turn into something worse. If I was quiet, I was safe. But being invisible as a child did something ugly to me as an adult. It left me starving to be seen, to be chosen. By 24, I was working a string of dead-end jobs, living alone in a tiny studio apartment that smelled faintly of mildew, and aching for someone to look at me and really see me. That's why when Daniel Mercer walked into my life, I let him in too quickly. It was the summer of 2016. I was working part-time at a coffee shop when he appeared, tall and broad-shouldered, with slick dark hair combed back like he'd stepped out of a black and white film. He carried himself with a confidence that made people glance twice. But what disarmed me was his tone when he spoke, warm, almost gentle. He ordered black coffee every morning for 2 weeks straight before asking my name. "You always smile when you hand me this cup," he said one morning, leaning against the counter. His eyes locked on mine, unblinking. "Makes the coffee taste better. What's your secret?" I laughed, heat rising in my face. "No secret, just doing my job." "No, it's more than that," he said softly. "Trust me." That was how it started. A few days later, he asked for my number. Our first date was at a dingy diner near my place, and I nearly choked on a milkshake from laughing so hard at his jokes. He told me about growing up in Indiana, about his father leaving when he was young. "Guess I've got a temper," he admitted once with a crooked smile, "but only when people push me." I brushed past it. I was already hooked. The first month was intoxicating. He brought flowers, scribbled notes he'd taped to my door, and told me I was beautiful in ways no one else ever had. For the first time in my life, I felt chosen, seen. But then cracks began to show. It started small. One evening my phone buzzed, and his head snapped up. "Who's texting you?" "My friend Maya," I said, showing him the screen. He smirked, not quite convinced. Later he said, "You don't need friends who distract you from us. We've got something special. Don't let anyone ruin it." I laughed it off, but within weeks he wanted to know everything. Where I was, who I spoke to, why I took so long to reply. If I wore something he didn't like, he'd say, "You're really going out in that? Don't you care what people think?" If I said something he disagreed with, he'd go quiet, stare at me with narrowed eyes until I scrambled to fix it. Each time I told myself he was just protective, that it came from love. By November, 4 months in, I invited Daniel over for dinner at my apartment. I made pasta, lit candles, even splurged on a bottle of wine I couldn't really afford. At first, the night was perfect. We laughed, talked about taking a trip together. For a moment, I believed everything might be okay. Then my phone buzzed. Maya again. Daniel's smile faltered. "You can't even go one night without talking to other people?" His voice snapped sharp, unexpected. I froze. "It's just my friend." "Yeah, your friend," he sneered, mocking the word. "You think I don't see what's going on? You light up when you talk about her. What is it? Are you into her now?" My stomach dropped. "Daniel, that's ridiculous." He slammed his hand against the table so hard the wine glasses rattled. My neighbor's dog barked through the wall, and the sound jolted through me like a warning. My whole body tightened, bracing for Daniel's next outburst, but instead he let out a long sigh and dragged his hand through his hair. "Sorry, babe," he muttered, his voice softer now, almost defeated. "I don't know what gets into me sometimes. I don't want to lose you." The sharp edge of fear dulled, replaced by the old familiar ache of wanting to fix him. Somehow I found myself comforting him, whispering reassurances I barely believed. That became our cycle. Over the next year, Daniel peeled me away from the rest of the world. It wasn't sudden, it was slow, deliberate. He didn't like Maya, so I stopped answering her texts. He didn't like the late shifts at the coffee shop, so I quit and found another job with hours that suited him. He told me one night, arms tight around my waist, "It's just us. That's all we need." I wanted to believe that. But the truth was, I felt myself shrinking inside those walls, gasping for air. Still, I stayed. Because each time he tore me down, he rebuilt me with roses, with apologies, with promises I'd spent my whole life waiting to hear. "You're the only one who understands me. I love you more than anything." Those words kept me tethered until the night everything came apart. It was March 2017. Daniel had been restless all day, pacing the apartment, snapping over little things like a dish left on the counter or the way I folded laundry. The tension was suffocating. Then around 9, there was a knock at the door. I thought it was the landlord. But when I opened it, a woman stood there. Mid-30s, hair tangled, eyes red and swollen like she hadn't slept in days. She looked straight through me with raw hatred. "Where is he?" she demanded. "Excuse me," I stammered. "Don't play dumb." Her voice cracked like a whip. "Where's Daniel?" Confused, I turned, and there he was behind me. His face had gone pale. "Claire," he muttered, barely audible. "Go home." "Claire," she snapped, correcting him sharply, her eyes cutting back to me. Then her voice rose, wild. "This is her, isn't it? This is the girl you've been screwing while I'm at home." Losing my mind, my stomach dropped, cold spreading through me. What is she talking about?" Daniel's hand closed around my arm. "Ignore her. She's crazy. She's my ex. She's been stalking me." "I'm your wife," Claire screamed, her throat raw with rage. "Don't you dare lie to her." Wife. The word detonated in my chest. He never told me he was married. Before I could process it, Claire lunged, grabbing my hair and yanking so hard my eyes blurred with tears. "You think you can steal him from me?" she shrieked. "Stop! Get off her!" Daniel yelled, but he didn't move fast enough. Claire shoved me down, and I curled on the floor instinctively as her boot lifted like she was about to stomp me. I screamed, covering my head. At the last second, Daniel yanked her back. They collided, thrashing in my tiny living room, their voices exploding into chaos. "You lied to me!" I cried out, tears burning hot. "She is crazy!" he shouted, struggling to hold Claire's wrists as she kicked and spat curses. "You don't know what she's like." "Crazy?" Claire's voice broke as she fought against him. Her chest rose and fell like she couldn't catch air. "Tell her about our marriage, Daniel. Tell her about the 3 years you promised me forever. Tell her how you still crawl back to me when you're bored of her." Ice filled my veins. My shaking hands fumbled for the phone on the floor, dialing 911. "Please," I sobbed into the receiver. "There's a woman in my apartment attacking me. Send someone." Claire thrashed and screamed. Daniel cursed, his face twisted as he tried to restrain her. I backed into the corner, heart hammering so hard the world blurred around me. Minutes stretched into eternity before the police arrived. When they pulled Claire out, still screaming, my legs gave out and I slid against the wall, gasping for breath. The officers were calm, professional. They took notes, asked questions, kept their voices even. Daniel insisted again and again that Claire was unstable, obsessed, that he was trying to move on and she couldn't handle it. But I couldn't stop shaking. My trust had snapped in two. "You never told me you were married," I whispered when the police left, taking Claire into custody. My voice cracked on every word. Daniel sighed, rubbing his face. "I was going to. It's complicated, okay? We're separated. The papers are filed. She just can't handle it." "You lied to me," I said, the words trembling in the air. "I didn't lie," he said firmly, stepping closer. "I just didn't tell you everything yet. I didn't want to scare you off." I stared into his eyes, searching for something true, something human. But all I saw was manipulation, the same kind I grew up around. That night, I didn't sleep. Daniel stayed, insisting he was protecting me, but every time I closed my eyes I saw Claire's face, her fingers tangled in my hair, her scream echoing in the dark. The next morning, while he showered, I packed a bag. My hands shook the whole time. When he stepped out, towel wrapped around his waist, he frowned. "Where are you going?" "I can't do this," I said, clutching my backpack like a shield. "You lied. You dragged me into your mess. I can't live like this." His jaw clenched. For a second I thought he'd erupt. But then he smiled. Cold. Certain. "You'll be back," he said quietly. "They always come back." I left without another word. It's been years since that night. I moved to another city, started therapy, cut Daniel out completely. But sometimes I still wake up in the dark, heart pounding, convinced I hear someone pounding on my door. The truth is, the horror wasn't just Claire's attack. The real horror was how easily I let someone like Daniel consume me. That's what keeps me up sometimes, that monsters don't always hide under the bed. Sometimes they hold your hand. Sometimes they tell you they love you. I never really believed in gut feelings. To me, that was the kind of thing people dramatized in novels or movies. This idea that your stomach twisted when something was wrong, that your chest tightened when danger was near. For most of my life, I treated everything like a puzzle that could be solved if you just looked closely enough. Logic, evidence, patterns, that's what I trusted. My mom used to shake her head at me and say, "One day, facts won't save you. You've got to learn to listen to your instincts." I'd laugh it off, tell her the world was explainable if you paid attention. I really believed that. Until I met Adrian Wells. To explain why I let him in, I need to explain who I was then. I grew up in Ashton, Illinois, a small town with one main street, 2 grocery stores, and enough gossip to make even the walls feel like they were listening. My dad walked out when I was 10, and my mom worked herself raw at a diner, raising me and my little brother Lucas. She was exhausted most nights, smelling of coffee and grease, but she never let us forget we were loved. At 20, I left Ashton for Riverside, a city 2 hours away, to attend community college. It wasn't glamorous. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, where the hum of the dryers below became a kind of endless white noise. I worked part-time at a bookstore, studied psychology at night, and called Mom every Sunday. I wasn't exactly lonely, but I ached for connection. My dating history was mostly high school awkwardness, half-hearted crushes that never lasted. By Riverside, I wanted something real, someone who would choose me out of everyone else. That's when Adrian appeared. It was at a classmate's party, the kind where music pounds too loud and people drink from red plastic cups until the floor feels like it's swaying. I remember standing by the window, watching rain streak down the glass, thinking about sneaking out without anyone noticing. That's when I heard a voice behind me. "You look like you're about to disappear." I turned. He was tall, clean-cut, dark hair curling slightly at the edges. His smile was warm, though it looked a little too practiced, like he'd rehearsed it in the mirror. He wasn't sloppy drunk like the rest of them. He seemed calm, composed, as though the whole room bent toward him without him even trying. "I'm just not great at parties," I admitted. "That makes two of us," he said easily, though something about him told me he was lying. He looked like the kind of person who thrived in any room. Still, he leaned against the wall beside me, giving me his full attention, and for once I didn't feel invisible. His name was Adrian Wells. He wasn't in school. Said he worked as a freelance photographer. "I like catching people when they're unguarded," Wani told me, "the way they really are, when they don't know they're being watched." We talked for hours while people stumbled drunkenly around us. We sat on the floor by the window trading stories about books, family, the future. He confessed he loved philosophy, read Nietzsche and Camus when he couldn't sleep. But it wasn't just the things he said. It was how he listened. He asked about my childhood, my dreams. And when I spoke, his gaze locked on mine like nothing else existed. By the time the party thinned out, he walked me outside. The rain had stopped, but the street still glistened under the lamplight. "Can I see you again?" he asked. His voice was steady, but his expression had this boyish hope to it. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. Our first date was at a tiny cafe I'd never noticed before, tucked away on a quiet corner. Adrian said he liked hidden gems, places untouched by the world. The cafe had mismatched chairs, chalkboard menus, and a stillness that made it feel separate from time. Conversation with him flowed effortlessly. He made my words feel important, like I wasn't just filling silence. By the end of the night, I felt both relieved and electrified. Someone had finally found me. After that, we were inseparable. Adrian showed up at the bookstore after shifts, leaning against the counter with that easy smile. He brought me coffee late at night while I studied or slipped handwritten notes under my door. "You're different," he told me more than once. "Everyone else feels shallow, but you're real." For someone who'd always felt ordinary, those words burned into me like fire. But then came the cracks. Small things at first. "Who are you texting?" he'd ask, casually, glancing at my phone when it buzzed. "You didn't answer when I called." "What were you doing?" He always said it lightly, his lips curled in a smile, but his eyes were sharp, unblinking. And slowly, the questions sharpened into accusations. If I showed up late, his jaw would tighten, his voice clipped. "You don't value my time, do you?" If I mentioned spending time with friends, Adrian would tilt his head and smile like he was being playful, but his words always carried weight. "Why do you need them when you have me?" I laughed it off the first few times, telling myself it was because he cared, because this was what people in relationships did. They wanted to be involved, to matter. But a part of me knew the tone wasn't casual. There was an edge to it, something controlling buried beneath the sweetness. One evening, we were sitting together in the library. My textbooks were spread out in front of me, highlighters scattered across the table while Adrian had only a notebook open. I realized after a while that he wasn't reading or writing. He was watching. Not me. Other people. His eyes followed strangers as they walked past, tracking them with unnerving intensity, like he was cataloging every gesture. "What are you doing?" I whispered, glancing around nervously. His lips curved into a grin. "Just observing." Everyone has patterns. If you look close enough, you can tell what someone's thinking. A chill slid down my spine. He meant it. Adrian loved talking about crime too. He'd bring up infamous cases and recount details with a kind of fascination that unsettled me. Once, while we were watching a horror movie, he said, "Isn't it amazing how someone can just vanish? One moment they're here, and the next, it's like they never existed." I laughed, trying to lighten the mood, but he didn't laugh back. His expression stayed cold, serious, and then, almost too late, he smiled. "I'm joking. Don't look so scared." But the unease clung to me long after the movie ended. Another time, he showed me a drawer in his apartment filled with knives. Different shapes, different sizes, polished to a shine. He slid a finger along one blade, admiring it. "Each one has a story," he said softly. "But they haven't written their real story yet." "Adrian, that's disturbing," I managed, my throat tight. He looked at me with a focus so intense I had to look away. Then he said in a low voice, "Don't worry. You're special. I'd never hurt you." But the way he said it didn't soothe me. It made my skin crawl. One Friday night, he insisted he had something planned, somewhere special. He drove us out of the city, down winding roads, until we pulled into an abandoned park. The air was thick with silence, the trees stretching high and skeletal around us. As we walked down a broken path, Adrian leaned close, his voice low. "You know how fragile life is?" he whispered. "One push, one fall, and it could all be over. And no one would ever know." "Adrian, stop. You're scaring me," I said, my voice trembling. He smiled, brushing his hand across my cheek like it was a tender moment. "I'm just sharing my thoughts. You inspire me. You make me feel alive." When I turned to leave, his hand shot out, gripping my arm, hard. "You don't understand," he said, voice flat, eyes burning. "I need you. You're my muse. Without you, I'm nothing." And then, in a single terrifying instant, his hand wrapped around my throat. He shoved me against a tree, his face inches from mine, eyes wild with something that was part passion, part madness. "I could make you disappear right now," he whispered. Panic surged through me. My nails clawed at his arms, my feet kicked against him. My chest burned, my vision blurred. The world shrank to nothing but his grip. Just when I thought I was slipping away, I slammed my knee into his crotch. He gasped, releasing me. I stumbled, sucked in air, and ran. Branches tore at my arms. My lungs screamed for breath, but I didn't stop. Behind me, his laughter rose, echoing, taunting, almost gleeful. I burst onto the main road, waving desperately. A car slowed. An older couple pulled over, eyes wide as they saw my state. Between gasps and sobs, I told them everything. They drove me straight to the police. But at the station, as I sat shaking, the officers didn't look convinced. "He strangled you, then just let you go?" one asked, skeptical. "Yes, I hit him. I got away. He was going to kill me." They wrote down my statement, their pens scratching, but their voices carried doubt. I left the station feeling more alone than I had in my entire life. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside my window made me flinch. Every shadow stretched too long. My parents begged me to come home, and within a week I packed up my tiny apartment and left Riverside behind. Years passed. I rebuilt myself, finished school, found steady work, learned to tuck Adrian into the darkest corners of my memory. I told myself he was gone, that he was just a nightmare I had escaped. And then, one night, years later, his face appeared again. I was flipping through TV channels when a rerun of an old dating show came on. The screen lit up with Adrian's smile, the same practiced warmth, the same sharp eyes that once locked onto mine. He laughed, flirted, charmed the audience. For a moment, my body froze. Then the anchor's voice cut in. "Adrian Wells, later convicted of multiple murders, appeared on this show just months before his first known victim. My stomach dropped. My hands went cold. The monster I had narrowly escaped was real. He had gone on to do exactly what he'd hinted at with that chilling smile. And as I sat frozen in front of the screen, I realized something horrible. I hadn't been unlucky to meet him. I had been lucky to survive him. But that thought brought no comfort because in the back of my mind, I could still hear his voice, low and certain. "You're special. I won't let you go." I'm not the kind of person who usually posts anything personal online, but this has been eating away at me for over a year. I have to put it somewhere. Anywhere. My name's Eli Turner. I was 16 when it happened, living in Bridgeport, Oregon. It's a small, quiet place tucked between the coast and the woods where nothing ever really happens, unless you count the annual town fair. That year, the fair landed on the first weekend of August. Same as every summer, it rolled in with rusted rides, overpriced cotton candy, and that strange mix of excitement and slow decay that somehow clings to everything. I went with 3 friends, Jordan, Casey, and Lena. We weren't exactly a tight-knit group, more like the kind of friends you end up with out of proximity and boredom. We spent the afternoon drifting from stall to stall, stuffing our faces, trying to win rigged games, and making fun of the creepy clown cutouts near the funhouse. Just after sunset, we noticed a vintage-looking photo booth wedged between 2 food stalls. It had chipped red paint, tarnished brass trim, and faded lettering that read, "Memories in a Flash." It looked like something from the 60s, something you'd expect to see collecting dust in a museum, not squeezed into a modern fairground. Naturally, we couldn't resist. We crammed ourselves inside. It was a tight fit, and it smelled faintly of dust and sun-warmed plastic. We took the usual goofy shots, tongues out, peace signs, scrunched up faces. When the strip printed, the first 3 frames were exactly what we expected, us being idiots under the booth's sickly light. But then there was a 4th photo. At first we all just stared at it, confused. Same clothes, same angle, still inside the booth, but none of us remembered taking it. Our expressions were stiff, unnatural, like we'd been posed. And behind us, in the shadowed corner of the booth, stood a man. He was tall, with slicked back hair and a blank, far-off expression. His eyes weren't aimed at the camera. They were just slightly off to the left, like he was watching something outside the frame. We tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a glitch? A prank? One of those booths rigged for scares, like a cheap haunted house gimmick? But it didn't feel like a joke. Lena got quiet, just staring at the stranger's face. She muttered that he looked familiar but couldn't say from where. Jordan laughed, but there was a crack in his voice. My chest felt tight, like the air had suddenly thickened. We scanned the crowd, but no one matched him. The vendor, a bearded man with mirrored sunglasses, was sitting behind the booth's control box. When we showed him the photo, he barely glanced at it before shrugging. "Not possible," he said. "This model only prints 3 frames. Always has." We left soon after, walking in silence. I remember the photo strip crumpled in Casey's sweaty hand, the edges damp. By the time we split off to our own houses, it was like we'd all silently agreed not to talk about it. That night my phone buzzed. A text from Jordan, just a zoomed-in picture of the 4th frame. "Look at his hand," he wrote. I did, and my stomach twisted. The man's hand wasn't resting naturally. It was reaching toward Lena's shoulder, fingers stiff, stopped mid-motion like he'd been about to grab her and froze. That's when it stopped feeling like some dumb fair gag, and more like something we shouldn't have seen at all. The next morning, Lena wasn't at school. No texts, no posts. Her mom thought she'd stayed at Casey's. Casey thought she'd gone home early. Jordan and I told ourselves not to panic, But by lunch, teachers were whispering, and a police officer had come to speak with the principal. By the time school let out, cops were already at the fairgrounds talking to vendors. Casey told them about the photo. She brought it the next day, creased but still clear enough to see that fourth frame. The officer taking her statement looked skeptical, until he asked where we'd taken it. Casey pointed straight at the booth. When they checked, the vendor, Jerry or Gerald, something like that, acted like he'd never seen us before. Said plenty of kids used the booth. He couldn't remember everyone. But when the cop asked about a fourth frame, he bristled. "That machine's been in my family since '72, he said, voice sharp. "It's mechanical, analog, there is no fourth frame." He even opened the back of the booth to prove it, rolled the film forward so we could see for ourselves. Sure enough, it was a classic 3-frame setup. No hidden mechanisms, no digital inserts, nothing fancy. I remember watching the officer's face shift. He looked like he couldn't decide whether we were playing some elaborate prank or if Jerry was holding something back. The air felt heavier, like everyone sensed something was wrong, but no one knew the next move. By the weekend, the booth was gone. Just gone. That entire row of vendors was still there. Funnel cakes, corn dogs, racks of cheap sunglasses. But the spot where the booth had been was empty. No tire tracks, no tarp, not even a dent in the grass. Jordan and I went back on Saturday afternoon hoping to see it again. But it was like it had never been there. When we asked around, people just shrugged or stared at us blankly. One older guy even said, "Photo booth? Haven't seen one of those here in years." That didn't make sense. We'd used it less than a week ago. We still had the photo strip, but when we tried to show it, the last frame looked different. Darker, almost overexposed. You could still make out our shapes, but the man's face had blurred, like it was melting into the shadows. After Lena disappeared, things spiraled fast. Her face was everywhere, on flyers taped to stop signs on the school bulletin board, even zip-tied to the fairground fence. But there were no leads, no witnesses. No one had seen her leave. Her phone went dark the same night she vanished. The police kept coming back to us, asking about the last time we saw her, what she said, how she was acting. We told them everything, the booth, the fourth photo, the man. But the more we insisted, the more they looked at us like we were making it up, Detective Barlow especially. He had this way of pausing before writing anything down, like he was weighing whether it was worth the ink. Then, a few days later, it happened again. Jordan was gone. The night before, he texted me saying he couldn't sleep, that every time he closed his eyes he saw the man's face. He said he kept dreaming about being trapped in the booth, the door jammed shut, the flash going off again and again. I told him it was stress, maybe guilt. He didn't answer. The next morning his mom said he'd left early for school, but he never showed, just gone. I brought the photo back to the police. This time I noticed something I hadn't before. In the fourth frame, Jordan looked different. His expression wasn't just stiff, it was scared. His eyes were wider, like he'd seen something right before the flash, and the stranger's hand, the one that had hovered near Lena's shoulder, was now hovering near his. That's when I finally said it out loud to the officer. "I think it's taking us. One by one." The cop didn't answer at first, just stared at the photo for a long moment, then asked if I had the original strip. I did. We compared it to the one I'd shown them earlier that week. It wasn't the same. Jordan's face was blurred now too. Casey was the only one left besides me. She said she wanted out, wanted to stay with her cousins in Bend until everything calmed down. I told her leaving wouldn't help, that if we ran, it would just follow. But she didn't listen. She left that night. 2 days later, she called from a burner phone, whispering like she was hiding. "It's here," she kept saying. I saw the booth, near a gas station. Same red paint, same lettering, but it wasn't plugged in, not even close to a power source. Then the line went dead. The number didn't work when I called back. The next morning I checked the frame again. Casey's smile looked wrong. Crooked, her body angled slightly away from us like she was already starting to slip out of the picture. After she vanished, I stopped sleeping properly. I kept the photo strip in a taped envelope, locked in a drawer, but I could still feel it there. Like it was humming, or watching. Every night I swore I heard the faint click of a shutter somewhere in my room. No flash, just the sound. The fear wasn't loud, it was quiet, patient, always in the corner of my vision. I started to wonder if it wasn't the booth doing this. Maybe it was the photo itself. A trap, a curse. Whatever it wasn't finished. Eventually, I did what scared teenagers do when nobody believes them. I went back. It was stupid, I know that now. But I thought if I could see the booth again, maybe I could stop it. The fair was long gone. The lot was empty. Trampled grass, scraps of trash swirling in the wind. But the booth was there, same spot. No lights, no vendor, just waiting. I don't know what I planned, burn it, smash it, bargain with it, but I stepped inside, closed the curtain, sat down. Nothing happened at first. Then, click, first frame, second frame. I didn't move, didn't smile. On the third flash, I felt a cold breath crawl down my spine. I turned, no one there. Fourth frame. I caught the faint reflection of the man's eyes in the booth's glass. I bolted, strip in hand, and didn't look back until I was home. In the first 3 frames, I was alone. But the fourth, I wasn't in it at all. Just the booth. Empty. And the man, standing dead center, staring straight into the camera. The next day, I gave the police everything, photo, story, all of it. I don't know what changed, but that week, they reopened a cold case from 1985. Same fairground, same booth, 3 missing teens. 1 photo with an unexplained 4th frame. The vendor vanished back then too. I still don't know what the booth is. Haunted. Cursed. Something worse. But it hasn't come back to our town. Not yet. I keep the photo locked in a metal box in my closet, wrapped in cloth. I haven't looked at it in over a year. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the soft rustle of paper inside, like another frame being added. And I know it's just a matter of when, because I was in that 4th frame once too. And whatever it is, it doesn't forget. It doesn't. Not sure if this is the right place to post, but I've been reading stories here for years. And after what happened to me and my wife last spring, I figured it was time to share. My name's Josh, I'm 33, and my wife Emily is 29. We'd just bought our first home together in rural Ohio, a beat-up old duplex on the edge of a dying little town called Mercer Hollow. The kind of place where people still waved from their porches but didn't quite make eye contact. The kind of place with more for sale signs than neighbors. We found the duplex on a foreclosure listing. It was dirt cheap, a fixer-upper sure, but we thought we were getting a deal. Turns out, we were getting way more than that. It was 2 stories, nothing fancy. Vinyl siding peeling in strips, faded blue shutters, and a half-collapsed shed out back that smelled like wet leaves and mouse piss. But we loved it. It had potential. Hardwood floors hidden under grime, clawfoot tubs, wide porches. Emily wanted to paint murals in the guest room. Me? I just wanted to make coffee in the mornings without hearing upstairs neighbors stomping around. The basement was a bonus for storage, though when we first moved in there was 1 locked door down there. We figured it was for plumbing access or a utility panel and didn't think much of it. We knew the previous owner had died, an old guy named Kenneth Doyle. No family, no obituary. One of those people who just quietly fade into the background of a town. The realtor didn't say much beyond that, only that the place had been sitting vacant for a while. While cleaning the attic, we found stacks of yellowed newspapers dated between 2006 and 2012, and a single Polaroid of a young girl. Cassie was written on the back in shaky handwriting. It creeped us out, but we chalked it up to leftover junk. We were focused on the future, not the past. It wasn't until our second week there that we finally got the basement door open. I'd tried every key we had and gave up. One afternoon, frustrated, I grabbed a crowbar. The door was solid wood, unusually heavy, with deep scratch marks around the frame, like someone had tried to pry it shut, not open. Behind it was a narrow hallway that didn't match the rest of the basement. The drywall ended abruptly, replaced by bare concrete walls painted black. At the end of the hall stood a steel door. No handle on our side, just a keyhole and 5 heavy bolts. It felt wrong. I didn't tell Emily right away. That night, while she was upstairs brushing her teeth, I went back down with a flashlight. None of our keys fit. Eventually, I used a drill to break the lock. Stupid, in hindsight, but I needed to know what was in there. When the door finally gave, a wave of damp, metallic air rolled out. Not the musty smell of mold, as more like rust, sweat, and something sour. The air was thicker in there. The room was about the size of a small bedroom. No windows, no light fixture, just concrete walls, an old stained mattress in the corner, and a heavy-duty shelf bolted to the wall. It was the shelf that froze me. 5 glass jars lined up neatly. Each had a white label, written in black marker. Lindsay, Tasha, Aaron, Mara, Isabel. Inside each jar was something different. One looked like it held a hair ribbon. Another, I swear, had baby teeth. I was still staring when Emily came down the steps. She looked at the jars, then at me, and her face went completely blank. Not scared exactly. Cold. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "Josh, this room isn't on the blueprint." We called the police that night. I didn't want to. It felt like trespassing on something old and ugly that should have stayed buried. But Emily insisted. The deputy who showed up barely looked old enough to shave. But when he saw the jars, his hand went straight to his radio. Backup arrived fast. They taped off the basement, brought in a forensic team, and took everything. We spent 3 nights in a motel while they processed the scene. When we were finally allowed back, one of the detectives, a woman named Riley, pulled us aside. She told us one of the names matched a missing person case from 2008, a girl named Mara Elliott. Last seen walking home from school, 2 towns over. She was 11. That's when everything blew up. News vans started parking across the street. Strangers knocked on our door asking if we'd seen ghosts or felt any evil energy. One guy even tried sneaking in through the basement's back window. Overnight, we weren't Josh and Emily anymore. We were the couple who lived in that house. The murder house. Or worse, the collector's house, like the media started calling it. Emily stopped sleeping. She'd sit in bed all night, scrolling through articles, digging through missing persons databases, looking for patterns in the names. I couldn't even go down to the basement anymore without feeling like something was standing in that 4th room, just barely out of sight, watching me. 2 weeks after the story hit the news, Emily shook me awake at 2:30 in the morning. "I heard footsteps," she whispered, "in the basement." I told her it was probably the pipes, or a raccoon, something logical, but I still grabbed my baseball bat and went to check. The steel door was wide open. I had locked it. I locked it. But the latch was twisted like someone had opened it from the inside. The room was empty, except the mattress had been moved just a few inches, enough to notice. And on the shelf next to the 5 jars, there was a 6th. No label, just a dried-up Band-Aid floating in cloudy water. I didn't tell Emily about that part. After that, we tried to sell the house. Dropped the price, no one wanted it. The property had gone infamous. Bloggers, ghost hunters, even a couple of true crime YouTubers tried sneaking onto our lawn for content. One guy from Indiana offered to rent it for a week so he could do a ritual. Emily almost threw her coffee at him. We felt trapped, not just by the mortgage, but by this legacy we'd never asked for. The town stopped seeing us as neighbors. At the grocery store, people stared. One morning, We found a note in our mailbox. Should have stayed locked. Detective Riley kept in touch for a while. She wasn't just doing her job. She looked genuinely disturbed by the case. She told us they'd tested the DNA from the jars, but the results came back inconclusive or possibly contaminated. Then she said something that stuck with me, that the shelf had deep scratches under each jar's base, like they'd been moved many times, carefully over years, almost like part of a ritual. But what chilled me most was when she leaned in, lowered her voice, and said, "This room wasn't built to keep people out. It was built to keep someone in." That sentence lodged in my brain like a splinter. I think about it too often, especially when I'm alone in the house. A month later, we made our decision. No discussion, no ceremony. One Sunday morning, we boarded the steel door shut, 2x4's nails silence. Then we shoved a shelf in front of the hallway and moved the washer and dryer to block it completely. Emily said it was for peace of mind, but I could tell she didn't believe it would actually stop anything. Still, things went quiet. No more jars, no more strange noises. Just us, in a house we no longer loved, pretending we were normal. But sometimes, in the kitchen, I swear I hear that steel door creak behind the drywall. Just once. Just enough to make me freeze. It took 9 more months before we finally moved out. Some investor from out of state bought it, planning to turn the duplex into rentals. Legally, we disclosed what we had to. The rest we left buried. Now we live near Emily's sister in Columbus. We don't talk about Mercer Hollow. It's like an unspoken deal between us. She won't bring it up if I don't. But sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and she's already lying there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. A few weeks ago, I got an email from an anonymous Gmail account. No subject line, no message, just an attachment. It was a photo of the shelf. Same concrete room, same jars. Except now, there were 8. 2 new labels. Josh. Emily. The picture was taken from the corner of the room, like the person was standing inside it. I tried to trace the IP. It bounced through so many proxies it led nowhere. I didn't tell Emily. I deleted it. But I kept a copy. I don't know why. Sometimes I wonder what Kenneth Doyle was really doing in there. Was he just a recluse with a sick obsession? Or was he keeping something worse contained? Maybe that 4th room isn't really a room. Maybe it's a doorway, or a trap, or something that needs names. All I know is, that place changed us. Not just how we live, but how we think about safety, about secrets, about the things that hide in plain sight right under your feet. If you ever find a locked room in a house that shouldn't exist, don't open it. Whatever's behind that door isn't meant for you, and once you see it, it sees you back. It sees. I used to drive the night route for the county transit here in Caldwell, North Carolina. Not much to it. Mostly quiet roads, small towns, and the occasional late-shift nurse or drunk college kid heading back to Lenoir. My name's Dale McCready. Back in 2016, I'd been with the Transit Authority for almost 9 years. Divorced, no kids, just me and my border collie, Riggs. I took pride in knowing every back road, every stop sign, and every one of the regulars, if not by name, then at least by face. My life was uneventful in a way I used to find comforting. That changed one Thursday night in late March, the kind of evening where the woods seemed too quiet, and the air still clung to the last bite of winter. I had just dropped off my final passenger before Hollow Creek, and what happened after that, I still can't explain. I remember pulling out of the last official stop, an old grocery store off Route 90, and checking the rear view. Only one passenger remained, Walter. He was an elderly guy with dementia who sometimes rode the bus just to get out of the nursing home. Usually a nurse came with him, but that night he was alone. He sat 2 rows back, mumbling under his breath. I couldn't catch a word of it. When he rang for a stop on Hollow Creek Road, I almost ignored it. Nobody gets off there anymore. That stretch isn't even on the route. It used to lead to hunting cabins, but those have been abandoned for years. Still, I slowed to a stop just in case. The woods there are so dense that the bus headlights barely reach past the first row of trees. Walter didn't move at first, then stood and shuffled up the aisle, his feet dragging like something heavy was pulling at his ankles. "You sure this is your stop, Walter?" I asked, watching him in the rear view. He didn't answer. He just stepped off the bus, turned toward the tree line, and as I reached for the door controls, I swear I heard him mutter, "They came from the trees." Something about the way he said it made my stomach knot. I didn't even know what it meant, but the words stuck in my head like a splinter. He disappeared into the dark without looking back. I waited a minute or two, half expecting him to return, maybe realizing it wasn't where he meant to get off. But he never came back. He was just gone. I called it into dispatch, told them I'd be making a quick U-turn since Hollow Creek doesn't loop back to the main road. That's when the radio cut out. No static, nothing. Just dead silence, like the whole system had been unplugged. The dashboard lights began flickering, the engine making a faint clicking noise even though it was still running. I hadn't seen another car in miles. Behind me, the road was pure black. I glanced at the side mirror. My taillights were reflecting off something between the trees, something tall. It wasn't there a second ago. I couldn't make out the details, but the shape was narrow, upright, and too still to be a person. For a moment I thought it might be a tree stump or my eyes playing tricks, but then it moved. Not a walk, more like a slow, fluid tilt, as if it was adjusting its weight. Then it froze again. That was enough for me. I threw the bus into reverse, cranked the wheel in a tight three-point turn and floored it back toward the main road. As the bus pivoted, I heard it. Something scraping the metal. Not an animal, not a branch. It sounded like long fingers dragging slowly down the side. I didn't stop. I drove for nearly 10 minutes without seeing another car. When the radio finally came back, it wasn't dispatch. It was a faint crackle, almost like someone whispering on the other end. "Dispatch, you copy?" I said into the mic. No answer, just the whispering. I kept my eyes locked on the road, but the feeling stayed with me. That crawling, heavy sensation you get when you know you're being followed. Even with no headlights in the mirror, I couldn't shake it. The whole drive back to the garage, I couldn't stop checking my mirrors. Every time I glanced up, I caught movement at the edge of the tree line, fast, low to the ground, darting between shadows. It wasn't just once or twice, it was every single time I looked. When I finally pulled into the depot, the lot was empty. That was strange. Steve or Marcy was almost always there for the overnight checks. I parked the bus, grabbed my logbook and headed to the break room. It was silent. Too silent. The wall clocks were blinking, like there'd been a power outage. I sat down, trying to steady my breathing. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I wrote a quick note to report what happened with Walter, locked everything up, and left. That was the last time I ever sat behind the wheel of that bus. Because the next morning they found it abandoned, right back on that same stretch of Hollow Creek Road. Engine cold, door wide open, and me, gone. Only problem was, I remembered driving it all the way back. I remembered locking the depot gate behind me, but the GPS data showed the bus route ending at the Hollow Creek drop-off. Same timestamp, same location. No footage from the onboard camera, no GPS logs after 8:47 p.m. And here's the kicker. Walter was found the next morning sitting in a diner 20 miles away, barefoot, covered in pine needles, mumbling the same phrase over and over to the waitress. "They came from the trees. They came from the trees." His shoes were never found. The investigation went nowhere. The transit authority pulled the logs, called in local police, even brought in some tech specialist from Raleigh to review the systems. They found conflicting records, one showing the bus arriving at the depot, another showing it shutting down on Hollow Creek Road. No fingerprints except mine and Walter's. No tire tracks leaving the pavement. No sign of forced entry. No sign of a struggle. Nothing. I tried explaining about the radio cutting out, the tall figure in the woods, the dragging sound along the bus. But I could see it in their eyes. They didn't believe me. After a while, I stopped trying to make them. Maybe I did sound crazy. Walter was transferred to another care facility a few weeks later. They said he had a rapid cognitive decline, couldn't speak, couldn't feed himself. The last thing he ever said right before they moved him was to one of the nurses, "Tell the driver not to look in the mirror." When I heard that, my blood ran cold. Because I had looked, and maybe I shouldn't have. I quit the job not long after. I couldn't set foot on a bus again. Couldn't even drive past Hollow Creek, not even in broad daylight. The trees there seemed too still, like they were waiting, watching. For the longest time, I didn't tell a soul what really happened. The official explanation was that I'd blacked out, driven the bus back without realizing it, then somehow wandered back to Hollow Creek. No charges, no consequences, just a lot of unanswered questions. But here's the thing. I have this recurring dream. I'm driving the same route, but the road never ends. The trees grow taller the further I go. The radio is dead quiet except for a whisper that grows louder each time. Don't stop. And the worst part? I always look in the mirror at the end of the dream, but I never see myself. I don't know what's out there near Hollow Creek. I don't care if it's some freak forest phenomenon, a hallucination, or something worse. All I know is something happened there. Something that made time stutter, made reality fold in on itself. If you ever find yourself on a road with no streetlights, no cell signal, and nothing but tall trees on either side, don't stop. And whatever you do, don't look in the mirror. I don't usually talk about this. It's the kind of story that makes people either stare at you like you've lost your mind or try to come up with some tidy explanation that sounds comforting, but falls apart the second you think about it. My name's Mallory Grant. I was living in Nashville when it happened, piecing together freelance gigs, juggling late invoices, just trying to scrape enough together for rent. My older sister Paige had moved back to our hometown in West Virginia a few months earlier. We weren't the type to talk every single day, but we were close, closer than most siblings, especially after our mom died. Paige always seemed to know when to check in. And then one day, she just didn't. It was late July, the kind of heat that sticks to you like syrup. I remember because the AC in my car died halfway through the drive back to Clifton. I kept the windows down, hot air battering my face, that sickly smell of asphalt rising from the road. That drive was the start of everything. Clifton's a small town cradled between low mountains and half-forgotten roads. The further you get from the highway, the more it feels like the world gave up on it decades ago. I hadn't been back in nearly 5 years and nothing had changed. But the moment I crossed the town line, something felt wrong. Not something you could point to. More in the way people looked from their porches, the way the quiet seemed heavier in places that used to hum with life. And then there was the quarry. Even the trees seemed to lean away from it. They said Paige had gone hiking alone the day she vanished. No note, no text, just a voicemail I didn't hear until hours later. "Hey, I think I found something weird out here." Then static. That was it. The official report called it a tragic accident. The terrain around Clifton Quarry is rough, unmaintained. They said she must have slipped, drowned. But there was no body. Just her phone, cracked, found near the edge of the woods, and one of her sneakers. I remember holding that shoe in the sheriff's station, staring at it like it could explain something. The cops kept talking about closure, like saying it enough times would make me feel it. I stayed in Clifton that week. I asked around. Old friends, teachers, even the man who used to run the gas station. Every single one of them said the same thing. Paige shouldn't have been up there. Not one person would tell me why. Only one woman, Mrs. Dorsey, she used to bake pies for the church, looked like she wanted to say more. She took my hand, her eyes glassy, and whispered, "Just let her rest now." Then she crossed herself and walked away, like we were standing at a grave. But Paige didn't have a grave. I could feel it, like some invisible thread between us was still there, still pulling. I didn't go back to Nashville. I rented a short-term room above the old post office. It smelled like dust and mothballs, but it was cheap and close to the quarry. Every day I drove to the edge of the woods where they said Paige had walked. The trail wasn't marked anymore, overgrown, like the forest had been trying to swallow it whole. I brought a flashlight, a journal, water, and my phone with that voicemail saved on it. I'd listen to it out there in the same spot, hoping I might hear something new. The static always started in the exact same place along the trail. A few days in, I found something. Not Paige, but something. It was a photograph wedged deep into a crack in a boulder near the eastern ridge of the quarry. The edges had curled, the faces were sun-bleached almost white. 4 people smiling stiffly in front of the same cliff where they said my sister disappeared. I didn't know them. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written 1993, and below it, barely legible, "Don't come back." I took it straight to the sheriff's office, thinking maybe it was a clue. He barely glanced at it before sliding it into a desk drawer. "Old prank," he muttered. "Locals like to scare hikers." But there was something in his face, just for a second, a flicker of recognition he couldn't hide fast enough. That night I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about that photograph, how it looked like someone had placed it there recently, not something that had been sitting untouched for 30 years. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep and started digging through old articles in the local archives. That's when I noticed it. Paige wasn't the first person to vanish near the quarry. There were others. 3 names, all from the same summer. Jack Redfield, Alyssa Lang, and Brent Waters. All hikers, all gone without a trace. Not one of them had a follow-up article, just a passing mention in the police blotter, and then nothing. It was like the town had deliberately erased them. The next day at the diner, I brought it up casually to the waitress, hoping maybe she'd heard something. She froze for a fraction of a second before forcing a smile. "People get lost in the woods all the time," she said, but she wouldn't look me in the eye. That was enough to push me back out there. I returned to the spot where I'd found the photo and searched for hours. That stretch of the trail always felt colder, even on those 90-degree days. The air was heavier there, like trying to breathe through a wet rag. Just past the ridge, I found it, something carved into the rock. 3 intersecting circles, jagged lines slashing through them. It didn't look natural. I brushed away dirt and moss, revealing more faint markings, words maybe, but they were too worn to read. I took pictures, even tried sketching it in my notebook. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft but steady, coming from behind me. I spun around fast. Nothing. No one. But the feeling stayed. That electric prickling along the back of your neck when you know you're being watched. Only this was worse. 10 times worse. I left in a hurry, nearly twisting my ankle on the way down. The next morning, I found my car keyed, not just scratched, but gouged into the paint in deep, angry slashes across both doors. And on the back window, etched clear as day, was the same 3-circle symbol I'd seen on the rock. I reported it, of course. But when the officer came, he barely pretended to take notes. The second I mentioned the symbol, his pen stopped moving. "Best not to stir things up, Miss Grant," he said. "People don't like outsiders poking at old wounds." I wanted to scream. I wasn't an outsider. Paige lived here. We grew up here. But in that moment I realized they'd already decided she was gone, and that if I kept pushing, I'd be next. Still, I couldn't let it go. I started knocking on doors again, this time armed with the names of the other missing hikers. Most people shut me down instantly, claimed they didn't know them. But finally, a man named Eli, who worked part-time at the scrapyard, gave me something. He remembered Jack Redfield, said Jack had been dating a local girl that summer, and the 2 of them used to hang around the quarry at night. One day Jack vanished. A week later, the girl's family packed up and left town. Town said it was a bear attack, Eli told me. But everyone knew that was bull. He leaned in then, voice low. There's something in those woods, Mallory. Something that doesn't want to be found. No matter how I pressed, he wouldn't say more. Just kept glancing over his shoulder like someone might be listening. The next day, I went back one last time. I don't even know why. Maybe I thought I'd find a piece of Paige's necklace or hear her voice again. I brought a shovel, thinking I'd dig near the carved rock. Instead, I found a hole already there. Not fresh, but recent enough that the dirt was loose, uneven. Inside was a small box wrapped in cloth. It held 3 things: a lock of blonde hair tied with red thread, a rusted compass, and another photograph. This one had Paige in it. She was standing in front of the quarry, looking off to the side like someone had called her name just as the picture was taken. On the back, in the same handwriting as before, she saw too much. That's when I ran. I didn't look back. I left Clifton the next morning, packed my things, and drove straight through the night back to Nashville. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't call the sheriff. I kept the photo, though. It's locked in a drawer in my apartment. Sometimes I take it out, just to remind myself it was real. Paige is still listed as missing. No remains, no new evidence. Just a sister who went for a hike and never came back. And sometimes I dream about those woods, about the quarry. I see her there, standing at the edge, facing the trees. I try to scream for her to turn around, but she never does. She just takes one step forward, and I wake up before she falls. I'm Sarah Whitman, and I've lived in Pine Hollow, Alabama my whole life. It's the kind of town where everybody knows everybody, and the loudest sound on a weekday morning is the hum of lawnmowers or the gentle clink of coffee cups down at Ruby's Diner. I've been teaching 9th grade English at Pine Hollow High for 11 years. Nothing glamorous, just literature, grammar, and the occasional pep talk to a kid convinced he's not smart enough. I rent a modest house 3 blocks from the school, drive a beat-up '99 Toyota Corolla, and own a cat named Milo, who only decides I'm worth his time when he's hungry. My life's always been slow, predictable, quiet. At least it was, until that morning. It was late March, still chilly enough that you needed a jacket before the sun warmed the pavement. I pulled into the school lot at 6:45 a.m., coffee in hand, ready to prep for first period. Everything seemed normal, but the front office was different. Too quiet. Brenda, the secretary, usually chirpy and just a little too nosy, sat pale-faced behind her desk, tapping her fingers against a file folder without looking up. "Did you hear?" she asked in a low voice like she was afraid of someone overhearing. "Hear what?" "Mr. Barlow died last night." I blinked. "Wait, Ray? The janitor?" She nodded, eyes glistening. I didn't know what to say. Ray Barlow had been at the school longer than I'd been alive. A quiet, wiry man who always wore a green utility jumpsuit at least 2 sizes too big. I used to joke that he'd been there since the bricks were laid. Brenda said it was a heart attack. He'd passed away in his little break room behind the gym sometime overnight. The principal found him when he didn't clock in. They'd already called his next of kin, already sent someone to clear out his things. It felt strange, how fast life moved on. I taught my classes, collected essays on To Kill a Mockingbird, and sat through a faculty meeting that dragged longer than the school day itself. By 4 p.m., I was in the teacher's lounge grading papers when I noticed a small cardboard box sitting on the table. A sticky note on it read, "Barlow's stuff." Someone must have dumped out his locker. Curious, I slid it toward me. Mostly junk, old pens, keys, 2 crushed packs of Marlboros, a rusty thermos that smelled faintly of soup. Then I found a small black spiral notebook, the cheap kind you can buy in bulk at Walmart. I almost left it, but something made me flip it open. Inside were pages and pages of names. Each name was written in neat, block capital letters, one per line. Most had dates beside them, sometimes single words. Accident, gone, lost. I didn't recognize most of the names until I turned to a page in the middle. My name, Sarah Whitman. Beside it, in all caps, one word, next. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Maybe it was another Sarah Whitman, but no. There was no hesitation in the writing, no smudge or correction. My eyes darted to the names above mine. Travis Holman, Denise Kerr, Miles Bradley. Each had dates and vague words beside them. Denise, I remembered, died in a car crash on Highway 12 2 years ago. Travis? Slipped off his roof-cleaning gutters. Miles. I vaguely recalled something about him disappearing on a hunting trip. The pattern formed in my head like a bad math problem I didn't want to solve. This wasn't random. It was a countdown. I wanted to believe it was a sick joke. Maybe Ray was lonely, maybe he'd lost touch with reality. But Ray Barlow wasn't senile. He could fix a busted locker with nothing but a bent paperclip and a lighter. He remembered birthdays without checking a calendar. And he'd always nod at me in the halls like he knew something I didn't. I closed the notebook, my hands shaking, and sat there far too long. The lounge was nearly empty, the building echoey and cold. I shoved the notebook into my tote bag and left without saying goodbye to anyone. That night I didn't sleep. By morning, I decided to take it to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Maddox is the kind of man who looks carved from red clay, square jaw, thick neck, always smelling faintly of barbecue. He didn't laugh when I handed him the notebook, but I could see the effort it took not to roll his eyes. He flipped through it slowly, then looked at me. You're saying this old janitor had a list of names, and all these people are dead? I nodded. And yours says next? Another nod. You think he was planning something? I hesitated. That's what I was hoping you could tell me. Maddox sighed, leaned back in his chair and said, They said they'd look into it and asked if I wanted to file a formal report. I told them yes, absolutely yes, and didn't leave until Maddox promised to run the names. I should have felt relieved after that, like I'd handed the nightmare over to someone else, but I didn't. If anything, the fear dug in deeper. That night, little things started happening. Weird things. My porch light kept flickering, even after I changed the bulb. Milo, usually fearless when it came to windows and bugs, wouldn't go near the living room window anymore. He'd sit at the doorway instead, fur bristling, growling in this low, almost guttural way, like something was outside. I told myself it was stress. A creepy notebook and a few coincidences don't mean much, right? But then the calls started. The landline would ring. I'd answer. Dead air. Just the faint hiss of a line that should have been empty. I'd hang up. And 30 seconds later, exactly 30 seconds, it would ring again. I started keeping track, writing down the times. I stopped answering, but that didn't stop the ringing. By the third day, I was locking every door and window even in the middle of the afternoon. I caught myself jumping at my own reflection in the kitchen window. At school, I felt eyes on me constantly, even in empty hallways. One of my students, a quiet girl named Hannah Pierce, lingered after class and asked, Ms. Whitman, are you okay? I must have looked awful. I'm fine, Hannah. Just tired, I lied. Truth was, I hadn't slept more than 2 hours straight since finding the notebook. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind against the siding made my chest tighten, and then Maddox stopped returning my calls. When I went back to the station, a deputy told me he was out sick. Someone would be in touch. No one ever was. It felt like the whole town had slowed down around me, moving with this quiet, deliberate rhythm, like it knew something I didn't. That Friday, I came home to find my front door slightly ajar. I knew I'd locked it. I always check twice, it's a habit. I didn't go inside. I backed away, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and called the police from my car. When they arrived, they did a quick sweep and said nothing looked disturbed. But I knew something was missing. The notebook. I'd hidden it in my bedroom closet inside an old boot box under a pile of winter coats. It was gone. I asked the officers if they'd taken it, thinking maybe Maddox had finally decided to take me seriously. But they looked confused. One of them actually chuckled and said, "Maybe the ghost of Barlow came back for it." I felt my stomach twist. I didn't even bother arguing. That night I stayed at my friend Maggie's place. She's another teacher. Kind. Doesn't ask too many questions. I told her just enough to make it sound like a break-in, and she offered me wine and her couch. Around 2:30 a.m. I woke to a sound. Metallic tapping. Not loud. More like someone slowly clicking a coin against glass. It was coming from the living room window. Maggie's apartment is on the second floor of an old duplex. There's no ledge, no balcony. Still, when I sat up and looked, I swear I saw the outline of a man standing outside her window, just standing there, head tilted slightly like he was listening. I flicked on the lamp. He was gone. That was my breaking point. The next morning, I told Maggie everything. To my surprise, she didn't laugh. She just went pale and leaned back like the words had pushed her away. Then, hesitantly, she told me she remembered hearing a story years ago about a student who went missing after Ray Barlow warned him to stay out of the woods behind the school. No one ever found him. People always said Barlow was odd, but maybe he knew things. Maybe he saw patterns, or maybe he made them happen. Maggie didn't say that last part, but it was written all over her face. I told her I didn't care anymore what it meant, I just wanted out. The next day, I packed the essentials, took a leave of absence, and drove straight to my brother's place in Tennessee. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even Maggie. I turned off my phone, deleted my social media, and tried to vanish. And for a while, it worked. No more tapping on windows, no more phone calls, no eyes watching me in the hallways. It was like a shadow had finally lifted. I stayed gone for 2 weeks. When I finally came back to Pine Hollow to grab the rest of my things, I found a letter taped to my front door. No envelope, just a single sheet of paper. At the top, in all caps, Sarah Whitman. Below it, one word: cleared. That's when I realized it was never about being killed or chased. It was about being watched, judged, like some invisible system was deciding who stayed and who disappeared. The notebook hadn't just been a list. It was a process, a filter. I don't know why I was spared. Maybe because I ran. Maybe because I told someone. Or maybe because it was taken before my turn came. I don't have answers, just scars no one can see, and a fear that never really leaves. I don't teach in Pine Hollow anymore. I moved to a new district, a new town, new apartment. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear that slow, deliberate tapping on my window again. I was 10 years old the day my brother Josh disappeared. We lived in a tiny Vermont town called Alders Hollow, population just over 1,000. The kind of place where people waved to you whether they knew your name or not, where gossip traveled faster than the mail. It was late October of 2009, when the air turns sharp enough to sting your nose, and the streets are buried under a coppery quilt of leaves that crunch with every step. Josh was 12, 2 years older, taller, and braver than me. We walked home from school together most days, cutting through this narrow trail in the woods behind the old textile mill on Alder Creek Road. Everybody used that trail. It was faster than going through town. To us kids, it had just enough creepiness to make it feel like an adventure. The mill itself was an ancient skeleton of a building, abandoned longer than I'd been alive. Its roof sagged in places, windows shattered into jagged black mouths. One whole side leaned like it might topple with the next heavy snowstorm. People said it had shut down in the 70s after some kind of accident, but no one ever gave details. No fences, no keep out signs, just a rotting hulk smothered in ivy, its rusted pipes groaning in the wind. Josh used to joke that the mill looked like a giant monster with its mouth half open. Every day we'd dare each other to peek into one of the busted windows, but neither of us ever worked up the nerve. That Thursday started like any other. We had science quizzes in the morning, and Josh spent lunch trading hot Cheetos for answers with that cocky grin of his, the one that made him seem untouchable. After school, we took the shortcut through the woods. It had rained earlier in the week, so the trail was soft, the fallen leaves slick and matted. Josh was a few steps ahead when he stepped on a branch that snapped louder than normal, the sound strangely sharp like it echoed back at us. I slowed to tie my shoe. When I looked up, he was gone. At first I laughed under my breath. Hiding and jumping out to scare me was exactly his kind of game. "Josh," I called, waiting for him to leap out from behind a tree. Nothing. No rustle, no crunch of leaves, no footsteps. The air felt wrong, still, like the woods were holding their breath. I called his name again, louder. The silence pressed in. My eyes kept scanning the trees until I noticed something ahead, near the base of the mill's cracked foundation, a dark patch that didn't belong to the building. I crept closer, my sneakers sinking into the damp earth. That's when I saw it. Josh's backpack, ripped wide down the side. His science book lay half buried in mud, and next to it, a sandwich in its plastic bag. The sandwich looked barely touched, but the bag had these tiny, jagged rips like something with claws had tried to get inside. I froze. I didn't even think to grab the backpack. My brain just stopped. There was no blood, no footprints, no scuffed earth to show a struggle. Just that horrible silence and the feeling that something had already decided I wasn't worth chasing. My legs felt heavy, like I was running underwater, but somehow I stumbled all the way home. I burst through the front door, gasping for air, and just stood there in the doorway. My mom's voice cut through, sharp and panicked. "Where's your brother? Where's Josh?" I couldn't speak. Something had snapped in me the second I saw that backpack. That night I didn't sleep. The cops came, then the search dogs, then more cops. They combed every inch of the woods behind the mill. Helicopters thudded overhead. Volunteers, neighbors, strangers, even kids from school, showed up with flashlights and walking sticks. They found nothing. No clothes. No blood. No trail to follow. The only other thing they recovered was an old rusted key, half buried in the dirt near where I'd found the backpack. Nobody knew what it opened. It looked ancient, like something pulled from a museum display, or forgotten in the back of your grandfather's junk drawer, waiting for a lock that didn't exist anymore. The cops didn't know what to do with me. I wouldn't talk. Couldn't talk. I just sat there in that stuffy little room, staring at the floor, tracing the grooves in the wood with my finger over and over, like maybe if I kept my focus small enough, my brain wouldn't wander back to what I'd seen. Therapists tried. Teachers gave me passes. My mom pulled me out of school for a while. Everyone figured it was trauma, and maybe they weren't wrong. But that wasn't the whole truth. I wasn't just scared. I was afraid to tell them what I'd really seen, because deep down I knew it wouldn't sound human. After I found Josh's backpack, right before I ran, I caught a glimpse of something through one of the mill's shattered windows. It was small, too small to be a grown person, but it stood upright. Its skin looked wrong, like paper left out in the rain, thin and warped, with patches darker than others. Its eyes didn't blink. They were huge, glassy, and fixed on me, like marbles pressed into a mask. For a second I thought it looked like a doll that someone had tried to bury and then dug back up. And then, God. I swear it smiled. Not a human smile, but something crooked, strained, like it had seen people smile and was trying to copy them without knowing how. That was the last thing I remember before my brain just went black. I don't know if I fainted or blocked it out, but after that day, I refused to go near the woods again. Even months later, when I finally started speaking again, I never told anyone. Not my mom, not the cops, not even the shrink they sent me to. How do you explain something like that without sounding insane? For years, I couldn't pass a window after dark without my stomach knotting up, afraid I'd see that face staring in. Eventually, my mom moved us to Montpelier to be closer to her sister. She couldn't stand Alders Hollow anymore. The empty bedroom, the way the neighbors stopped asking about Josh after the first year. But here's the thing. Josh wasn't the first kid to disappear near that mill. Not even close. Years later, when I was in high school and finally worked up the nerve to look, I found an old article about a boy named Eli Morton who vanished in 1974. Same age as Josh. Same shortcut. No body. No explanation. Just a single line from the sheriff that made my blood run cold. We found a key. That's all we found. I kept digging. Over the decades, there were 5 more cases, always boys between 10 and 13. Always gone without a trace, always near the mill. That's when I realized this wasn't some local ghost story parents made up to scare kids, it was real. Something was there. Something that wanted kids. And I think I know why I saw it that day. It didn't want me. Not yet. I was the younger brother. I was supposed to come back. I was supposed to remember. 2 years ago, I went back. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that it was nothing. That the mill was just a rotting husk. It wasn't. The place had collapsed even more. One whole wall caved in. But the windows, those same busted panes, were still there, tilted at the same angle. I swear I didn't get 10 feet from the building before I heard it. A soft scraping, like nails dragging slowly across wood. I didn't stick around to see what made it. I turned and walked away fast, forcing myself not to run until I was back on the main road. I still don't know what that rusted key was for. I still don't know what that thing inside the mill really was. All I know is it took my brother and it's still there, waiting for the next kid who wanders too close. I don't care if no one believes me. I'm writing this because if anyone in Vermont reads it, if you live anywhere near Alder Creek Road, don't take the shortcut, please, just don't. I've lived in Elridge, Kansas my whole life. It's the kind of place you can drive through in under 10 minutes without even realizing you just passed a town. I'm 38 now, working nights as a cook at the only diner here, Stella's. It's been around forever, passed down through 3 generations. Everyone knows each other by name. Nothing big ever happens here. Or at least, nothing we talk about out loud. That morning started like any other. Slow breakfast rush. The same 3 old-timers arguing over the jukebox while I was in the kitchen grilling sausage links for the 1,000th time. Around 8:45, I stepped out back to grab more eggs from the storage shed. When I came back in, she was there. A girl I'd never seen before, standing behind the counter like she'd always belonged there. She wore one of our uniforms, slim build, pale skin, long dark brown hair tied back with a green ribbon. She looked like she'd stepped out of an old photograph. Not ugly, not strange, just dated. Like she didn't quite belong to this decade. I figured maybe Stella had hired her for the weekend shift. But Stella wasn't working that day, and no one had mentioned anything about a new hire. She smiled at me like we'd met before. "Morning," she said softly, setting a glass tip jar down near the register. I nodded back and went about my morning, but the jar caught my eye. It wasn't the usual one with tips written in marker. This one had a strip of paper taped to the front that read, "For local families in need." Beneath it was a neat list of names written in black ink. Perfect penmanship. At first I didn't think much of it. People here have big hearts and we've had our share of hard times. But later, during the lunch shift, one of the regulars, Jim Carrion, stopped and stared at the jar. "Ain't that something?" he muttered. "I know that name, and that one too." Jim's an ex-mailman. He knows this town better than Google Maps. He leaned closer, picked the jar up, and frowned. These people, they're all dead. That made me stop flipping a burger. "You sure?" I asked, half laughing, but his face stayed dead serious. One by one, he started naming how they'd died. A house fire on Hollow Creek, a car that veered off the old quarry road, a kid who vanished and was found months later by the riverbank, And yeah, I recognized the names too. Not all at once, but once I heard them out loud, something clicked. These weren't just people who died in town. These were the deaths nobody talked about, the ones that left a shadow over the place. I walked over and picked up the jar myself. The names were written in perfect cursive, the kind they taught in schools back in the 60s. I asked the girl, because no one had introduced her by name, where she got the list. She didn't look up from refilling a coffee cup, just smiled faintly and said, "From the town registry." I wanted to make sure I honored the right people. The way she said honored didn't sound like charity. It sounded like she was talking about keeping the dead alive in memory. I pressed a little more. "Which registry exactly?" She shrugged, like it wasn't important. "Old one I found at the library. Thing is, our library burned down 3 years ago. It's still an empty lot." By mid-afternoon, word had spread. Folks came in just to look at the jar. Some went quiet when they saw the names. Others got angry. One woman, Cheryl Barnes, pointed to a name and said, "That's my cousin. He died in 2016 car accident. Still doesn't make sense how it happened." She turned to the girl. "Why would you put his name on there?" The girl didn't hesitate. "Because he needed to be remembered." When I realized I still didn't know her name, it hit me that nobody else did either. Not even Linda, our shift manager. She's been working the books for over 20 years. She pulled the employee log and found nothing. No application, no background check, no signed W-4. It was like the girl had just appeared inside the building. Linda got spooked enough to call Stella at home. I could hear her in the back office whispering into the phone like she didn't want the girl to overhear. I was standing near the kitchen door when Linda came back out. Her face was pale as drywall. She didn't say much, just walked straight over to the girl and asked where she lived. The girl smiled. That same polite, wrong-era smile that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "I don't stay in one place long," she said, calm as ever, before going right back to wiping down the counter. The whole moment felt wrong, like she wasn't thrown off by being confronted, almost like she'd been expecting it. Around closing time, things got even stranger. I stayed late to help clean. Around 9:30 I came out of the kitchen, and the jar was gone. Just gone. No trace of it. No trace of her. Her apron was draped over the back of a stool, folded too neatly, like someone had taken their time making it perfect before leaving. The next morning, Linda checked the security cameras. The footage from that entire night was corrupted, just static. In the 17 years I'd worked at Stella's, that had never happened before. And no one ever saw her again. By the following morning, the whole town was buzzing. Someone called the local paper, but they wouldn't run a story. Too sensitive, they said. A few folks asked around, thinking maybe she was related to someone in town, but nobody recognized her. Linda even took a copy of the employee schedule to the sheriff's office. Deputy McCoy flipped through the pages and said, flat out, "This girl was never hired. We don't even have her name on file anywhere." And just like that, it was like she'd never existed. No trace, no paper trail. Just a strange memory and a jar full of names no one should have known. About a week later, something else happened that stuck with me. Jim, the old mailman, came in again, but quieter this time. He said he hadn't been able to stop thinking about that list. He told me he'd been trying to write down the names from memory. He got to 13 before he had to stop, because that's when he noticed it. Every single one of them had died on the same exact day of the month. The 17th. Different years, different causes, but always the 17th. We checked. He was right. I'd never seen Jim rattled before, but that day his hands shook while he drank his coffee. I wish I could say we got answers, that she came back, or someone figured out who she was. But we didn't. Some folks think it was a prank. Others say it was just a weird coincidence. Me? I don't know. There was something about her that didn't feel like a joke. The way she spoke, the way she moved. It was like watching someone who had done this before. Many times, like she'd been in that diner 100 times in 100 other towns doing the exact same thing. Like it was a ritual. I don't work at Stella's anymore. I left about 4 months after it all happened. But sometimes when I'm passing through a small town on the highway and I see a little diner, I can't help glancing through the window, half expecting to see her behind the counter, folding napkins or pouring coffee with that same calm smile. And I wonder, if I walked in, would she remember me too?